Chapter 964. At this moment, every single one of Huai Shi's afterimages contained not only his own power, but also a large amount of origin substance. It could be said that every single one of his afterimages was a raven, a sharp blade filled with hatred. If one wanted to swallow his own origin substance, they had to be prepared to have their throats slit by the blade. Lu Baiyan thought that his ruin's end could suppress Huai Shi's origin substance, but Huai Shi's origin substance was not as simple as the other great arbiters of fates. That was the highest level of divinity, a power that had been personally reinforced by Balder. Unless it was a giant serpent from the mortal world, it was better to forget about it. The feeling of the sharp blade tearing his body apart, just thinking about it made one feel sympathetic. But when Lu Baiyan's 5 fingers contracted and he wanted to crush the resentment in his body, he saw the blade quickly shatter and disintegrate into steel feathers. They pierced through his flesh and blood, broke free from his body and the projection's body, and flew out. They returned to Huai Shi's surroundings. They returned. Under the control of the forging furnace, the countless blades turned into a steel storm that spun fiercely, shattering all of Lu Baiyan's reflections. You've never seen this before, right? Within the steel storm, Huai Shi raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Let me show you something new. The mountain ghost's ecological cycle instantly unfolded. Countless vile plants, poisonous flowers, thorns, and giant trees instantly broke out of the ground, taking root in the deep frozen earth. Fierce poison and curses wildly spread from every wisp of flower fragrance. The barren and shattered earth once again became a paradise on earth. However, behind this fragrance and splendor hid a bottomless darkness and malice that was as deep as a primitive forest. What responded to him was a spreading black cloud. That pale face was filled with coldness. He swallowed this insignificant amount of blood and murmured hoarsely, "Why is it raining?" How did the legendary rain god cause the wind and rain to rise? With the support of 3 great arbiters of fate, the Heavens Inquisition's secret instrument transformed again. The sea of ink boiled, forming dark clouds that covered the sky. Countless cold rain, mixed with poison, fell down. Everywhere it passed, everything returned to desolation. In the most direct way, it forcefully destroyed Huai Shi's ecosystem. However, this was still not the end. Thunder and lightning of dusk, what is there to worry about? The sky was cloudy, and the night was filled with thunder and lightning. How could it return? Thus, thunder brewed from the dark clouds. Countless sharp lightning bolts descended, piercing the iron wind around Huai Shi's body. At the same time, the world of darkness, the world's interior and exterior was sealed, forming a narrow hell. Then, the crown of national death's end. The 3rd stage arbiter of life raised her palms again and clasped her hands together. Spirit of the great Jew, how large was the God of the divine, of the God of fate, of the world of the world of the world of the world of the abyss of fate, the void with the abysses, end of the worlds, was to be of the heavens God, of the gods of the winds, of the God of the was, that was to heaveness the, of the bulls, this to answer, its blazing flames burst forth once more. The cold and gloomy wind and rain were defeated, and the branches of the remaining evil were also torn apart by the mighty galloping of the fiery wind. A perfectly straight path was torn open, and it sped towards the giant snake with its mouth wide open. Origin form incarnation, wrath. Under the superposition of supreme, the activated origin form armor tore apart the god of fate's projection. Soon, it was covered by the endless black butterflies once more. However, when Huai Shi raised his hand again, a flock of resentful crows spread their wings from the nightmare, transforming into a torrent of iron light that crossed the endless darkness. A nimble white deer broke through the darkness, breaking out of the sea. The sharp light of the spear of compassion appeared. Pierce down. Mastery, symphony. When the rhythm of the entire snowfield thundered and converged into one, the spear crossed the long distance at an unimaginable speed. It was already within reach. How can the turtle of the mountain be settled? The great arbiter of fate roared in unison. Divine mark, heaven's inquisition changed again. How could the giant turtle that carried the heavens and earth and the sacred mountain remain stable? Thus, the illusion of thousands of green mountains appeared from the sea of ink. Thousands of mountains formed a wall that overlapped with each other. Then it shattered again. It collapsed heavily. It tore through the illusion of great arbiter of fate like a hot knife through butter, and finally stopped in front of Lu Baiyan's hands. It was only a hair's breadth away from his face. "Is that all you've got, Lu Baiyan?" Great arbiter of fate looked down at his opponent. He seemed to be smiling, but his eyes were burning with flames as if he couldn't believe it. He mocked and questioned. "Are you sure?" At this moment, many people's attention was drawn to this duel after looking through the mirror. Reality, the border, and even hell. In just a short moment, the battle between the two generations of great arbiter of fate was too much for the spectators to take in. They almost held their breaths and widened their eyes, unwilling to relax for even a moment. In Dongxia, in Xian Niao's office, there was only a crackling sound in front of the television. It was Quafu who was pouring potato chips into his mouth. Aya, as expected of heavenly states, cowherd. "This skill is so good." He was still exclaiming, "Look at this sound and light effect. It's not normal, not normal." As he said that, he wiped the salt off his hands on the sofa beside him. Beside him, Diding's eyes twitched. He looked down at the crumbs on the sofa and the floor, then turned back to look at Xian Niao, who was smiling warmly by the window. He secretly lit a candle for his brother in his heart. "You're really lucky that Tyr didn't kill you last time. Can't you learn from your mistakes?" Ahem, this battle looks very intense. The two contestants have also entered the zone. He wanted to ease the atmosphere, but then he subconsciously entered the commentary mode. That's fast. Contestant Weischer's counterattack has effectively stopped his opponent's attack and created precious breathing space for himself. Next, let's see how the other contestant will deal with it. It's Heaven's Inquisition again. Aya, this is a level suppression. How can three great arbiters of fate lose? Not long after, he sensed the resentful gazes around him. "You better shut up." And when the Harkin sensed the smiling gaze behind it, the Harkin wisely turned off its microphone. It was naturally duty-bound to ease the atmosphere for its good brother, but it was better not to share the firepower for its good brother. Forget it. Next time, definitely. And in his observation, the entire snowfield had turned into a hell filled with countless poisons and curses. When the two great arbiters of fate unleashed all of their power without holding back, the first thing that was changed was the fragile environment. The sacred mark, which was originally used to control and transform hell, was now operating several times more efficiently, constantly pulling everything into an even more dangerous abyss. After that, whether it was the innumerable hordes that evolved in the Ink Sea or Weischer's miraculous use of origin substances, it was an eye-opener. I've always seen Weischer as a brat, but I didn't expect him to really be a summoner. Quafu clicked his tongue and sighed. To be able to fight evenly against a level 4 ascendant. Amazing. He's really like me when I was young. Little Yi, what do you think? Maybe he'll die, Yi Shuya said sympathetically from the chair beside him. Isn't he still fine? Quafu didn't understand. No, I'm not talking about him. It's you, Yi Shuya sighed. This guy is hopeless. But since they've been colleagues for so many years, she wanted to help if she could. She turned to look at Xian Niao and asked curiously, "Old man, you want to bet on that side?" You want to have a go? Shuya, I won't say anything about respecting the elderly. Gambling during working hours, demerit, and demotion. If you don't change after repeated warnings, you'll be fired, okay? Xian Niao expressionlessly waved the administrative punishment regulations in his hand, indicating that these troublemakers should know their place. Especially Di Ting. He had already secretly opened the betting page of tomorrow's news. He was counting on his insider information to earn some pocket money. How shameful! After food, Songguang took the only conscientious little white to hell, without the Qilin's deterrence. These guys began to shit at an unimaginable speed. The old man sighed in melancholy and began to seriously consider, should I kill a chicken to warn the monkey, straighten out the discipline in the system, and restore the style? Thus, Quafu inexplicably began to tremble. Wave after wave. Was the air conditioner too cold? He stuffed another bag of chips into his mouth, crunching, eating even more energetically. Yi Shuya helplessly shook her head, completely giving up the idea of helping him. She turned to look at the projection on the television. No wonder Xian Niao was too lazy to come to a conclusion. There was really no need to come to a conclusion. Huai Shi, as a third-stage ascendant, was able to fight back and forth with a fourth-stage great Ximing, which was already enough to stun people. It was just like the difference in level, and the suppression of a higher-level stigmata on a lower level did not exist. With such a deep foundation, there were only a few in the whole realm. But Lu Baiyan's experience was too rich, from the beginning until now. Other than being limited by his own experience and accidentally underestimating Huai Shi's afterimages, he did not give Huai Shi any chance to take advantage of. 50-50, she whispered softly. There were too many variables, and the fate involved between the two was too great. Behind them was a competition between celestial genealogy and golden dawn. This was a battle that was enough to determine the future. If she wanted to pry into it forcefully, she would only hurt herself. Only those who observed fate knew how to be cautious and careful. They would never overexplore things that did not matter to them. Xian Niao shook his head and reminded her of something she had neglected. The problem is that Huai Shi, that kid, will only have a 50-50 chance of winning against most opponents. Lu Baiyan is already old. Although it was strange for an old man of about the same age to say this, Yi Shuya still instantly understood what he meant. Years have passed. Xian Niao sighed. Even if he was stronger than Huai Shi back then, how much of his edge can he still retain after so many years of imprisonment? After betraying the Republic, I'm afraid that only forgotten hatred is left to support him. He paused for a moment, having already foreseen what would happen next. If he wants to win, I'm afraid there are still some changes brewing, right? At that moment, Russell issued a new order. How's the preheating of the dragon summoning flute? He said, get ready to fire. On the other side of the realm, after returning from the restaurant counter, Russell glanced at the phone screen and instructed Isaac, it's rare that so many curse-like crystals have been deposited recently. Let's empty 2 bases first. Isaac's expression froze. Aren't we waiting for Huai Shi to solve it? Why did you suddenly flip the table in the middle of a one-on-one battle? Of course, it's best that we can do this, but we have to be prepared for the worst, right? Russell said without shame. Those guys from Golden Dawn are not opponents who follow the rules. In order to fight against celestial genealogy, they will definitely do anything. We call this predictive defense. Predictive defense is F*King Good. Isaac felt that his concept of law had been impacted by his superior's words. But since the headmaster had given the order, Isaac had no objections. He was already quite dissatisfied with the plan to let Huai Shi carry out the crusade. It was too risky to bet their precious future on such a gamble. What was the point of talking about righteousness when dealing with this group of evil, if it were not for the fact that Russell was not in the headquarters, he would have taken the field himself. In order to make up for the impact of Lu Baiyan's betrayal, the Ivory Tower spent a lot of money to get the right to dispose of this incident from the Directorate of Defense. After all, it was a bad accident that could threaten the safety of the realm. To be able to get it so smoothly proved that Russell's connections were ridiculously strong. In the present realm, only the P5 and the 5 major lineages had the ability to freely exercise sovereignty within their jurisdictions, territories, and lineages. In other words, this was also a task that the Ivory Tower had to complete. They gambled all their reputation and the possibility of a comeback. Next, unless the situation deteriorated to the point where the Ivory Tower could not resolve it, the Astronomy Association would not interfere. Similarly, once the Astronomy Association intervened, no matter what the result was, the rise of celestial genealogy would be completely ruined. And now, under the observation of the major lineages, Huaishur had proven that his strength was not inferior to Lu Baiyan's. It could be said that it was a perfect start. Therefore, although there was a slight disharmony, it was also a good thing to be able to end it quickly. But the moment he issued the order to reload, a hoarse voice suddenly appeared in the dragon summoning flute's observation. It was Yeji's chant, and it sounded from the deepest part of hell. Chapter 965. Aren't people and trees the same? A low voice echoed between heaven and earth. The more a person seeks to rise to the top and the light, the more his roots struggle to go down, to the ground, to the darkness, to the depths, to sin. In that instant, sin had descended. Sayings of Thulith? Isaac almost crushed the screen in his hand. He was so angry that he lost his voice. That was also a precious treasure stolen by the Golden Dawn. From heaven. No, it should be said that it was one of the foundations of the land of dreams. As a copy of the reality, it was the pillar that could move freely in hell and the tool that repeatedly penetrated the reality. It was the prototype and design plan created by the earliest pioneer society when they established the 3 major seals. It corresponded to the great mystic instrument, Zarathustra. In other words, its existence itself was equivalent to a miniature reality. At this moment, when Yezi used the power of Sayings of Thulith to pry open the 3 major seals, the high wall of the reality would also temporarily disintegrate. A fleeting small hole was chiseled in the high wall, allowing the power of hell to seep into the reality. But what made Isaac even more vigilant was that this mystic instrument was not only to temporarily open the reality, but also pointed to a certain existence in the deepest part of hell. A certain behemoth. What is that? He ignored the alarm and adjusted the observation filter of the dragon summoning flute to the maximum. He felt countless flickering lights and shadows from the abyss rushing into his soul, burning and tormenting his will. He widened his eyes. Finally, he caught a glimpse of that ferocious appearance. Fire immediately. Isaac roared, but it was too late. He closed his eyes the moment he gave the order. The mark of Kronos was activated, instantly enveloping his soul, and began to sneak into the past. But very quickly, he was ejected by a trap hidden in time. Someone had already erected a high wall in the past in advance. At that moment, the deepest sound rang out from Lu Baiyan's body. The sea of ink boiled, accompanied by his hoarse roar. Incorporeal knives and brushes were dipped in ink, crisscrossing in the void. The sketching began, in the direction of hell. Thus, in the boiling ink sea, countless sharp branches slowly rose up, outlining the outline of a giant tree that covered the sky and the earth. The sound from hell contained hatred, and the sharp cry of a baby came from between the branches. The moment he arrived, his thirst spread throughout the entire wasteland, placing everything in the category of food. It couldn't wait to reach out toward Huaishur. Through the Doomsday Painter's reinvention, The surviving evil that had been severely injured by Huaishi's hands sent down a projection with hatred and began to take revenge. He was stunned for a moment. Huaishi finally felt the threat of death. It was close at hand. His opponent had actually started to call for people. The world changed too quickly, and he was caught off guard. Surviving evil? The French fries in Russell's hand paused in the ketchup. "That's your plan, Woodman?" he murmured admiringly. "It's a good card, Dash." Next to Russell, the demented old man who was drooling on the sofa and taking a nap suddenly raised his eyes. As if he had woken up from a long dream, his turbid eyes turned blood red, and he stared at the empty seat across the table. He was like an old beast choosing a person to devour. But soon he was in a trance again. The short sobriety ended, and he fell into a dream again. He just mumbled the name in his mouth and chewed on hatred. "Long time no see, Marcus. How are you?" In the reflection of the window, Woodman, who was sitting on an empty chair, smiled. "You look much gentler than when we parted that year. Do you still recognize me? I am your good friend." "Good friend?" "Yes," Woodman replied. "We used to be brothers." "Brothers and sisters?" The dull old man mumbled vaguely. "Lies." Woodman's smile froze for a moment. "Flattery never comes from a great heart. In a daze," Marcus murmured as if he was sleep-talking, "the ship of lies won't sail far. Your heart is empty, and what you say is only bubbles." Russell laughed. "Look, Woodman, the lie was seen through before it was spoken. You are getting worse day by day. You can't even fool a person with Alzheimer's. Why did you go through so much trouble to arrange all of this? Take a guess, Russell. Maybe you can ask the old magical conch next to you." Woodman sneered and asked, "But I'm more curious. What kind of trump card is your son hiding? To be honest, I don't know if you regret not being with your heir. At least you could have taken care of him at the end of his life." "You think too much." Russell shook his head self-deprecatingly. "I must be behind someone in the order of taking care of him at the end of his life. Maybe even his girlfriends are ahead of me in the order. But then again," he paused and asked curiously, "why do you think you will win? Even if I am too far away to help." On the phone screen, the expanding scroll suddenly stopped. It was as if the signal was bad. The video lagged. The growth of the ink stopped abruptly. Only a small icon appeared in the sky and began to circle, and at the edge of the wilderness, in the wind and snow, a stone statue suddenly appeared. The thinker. The stone statue, with its head lowered in contemplation, seemed to have experienced thousands of years. It was covered in moss and the vicissitudes of time. The hanging stone robe was like silk, showing a wonderful texture. The creator's eyes were lowered, as if he was in deep thought, but it made the world stop. And when he raised his eyes, the whole world fell silent. Countless laws operated in his will. The passage opened by Saruchi's words was actually closed in an instant. The power of the surviving evil was suddenly cut off, leaving only an incomplete outline. Creator Sharma. Guess what? Russell's fries rolled happily in the ketchup. It was sweet and sour. "After you left, I called him again and made a small suggestion." Woodman's smile gradually disappeared, becoming cold and regretful. "You're even more impatient than I expected. Shalma, like you said, Woodman, there must be a choice." A distant and cold voice sounded. "Now, you have thrown the coin. I just want an answer, whether the answer is in heaven or hell. So, before the coin fell, don't interfere with my observation." The lonely creator looked down quietly, such a cold bystander, weighing the weight between heaven and hell, waiting for the flipped coin to fall and get the real result. And now, through the long wind and snow, the two sides of the coin faced each other. "It seems that your channeling was interrupted." Huaisher seemed to be curious and asked knowingly, What happened? This is the first time I saw you fail to get the answer. Is your condition not good? How about I give you a little more time? He sincerely suggested, you can perform again. Under the solidified sea of ink, Lu Baiyan slowly raised his head, and a trace of ferocity finally appeared on his face, which was tainted by ink. Why, sure, your face, he whispered softly. What an eyesore! What a coincidence! We are the same. Huaisher nodded and sighed softly. This is probably the difference in appearance. There is no way to make up for it. Please don't mind it. You have been ugly all your life. Why care about the last few minutes? The contempt and mockery were no longer concealed. It was so straightforward. At that moment, Lu Baiyan's eyes were bloodshot. The remnant's incomplete reflection screamed. Countless ear-piercing cries burst out from the sea of ink. The mournful branches quickly contracted and shrouded the man. It pierced deeply into his body. It took root. A hoarse roar sounded from among the countless withered branches. The baby's cry and the man's roar overlapped. Gradually, it turned into a more gloomy and ear-piercing sound. White baby, Hushin Tong. The power of the divine mark, Heaven's Inquisition, was displayed again. This time, it was not used on the outside. Instead, it was used on the inside of his body. It quickly corrected all the deviations and errors. The two completely different powers merged perfectly at this moment, even though what was triggered was a solidified qualitative change. Among the countless withered branches, Lu Baiyan raised his scarlet eyes. A low voice from hell slowly spread. Good medicine of Anderson, can it solidify? The white rainbow was used as an ornament. Why was Chang Yi so majestic? Where did he get the elixir of immortality? Why couldn't he keep it for long? With the power of the divine mark, Lu Baiyan ushered in another transformation. It was supposed to be used to merge Great Si Ming with his large group of Great Si Ming, allowing him to evolve with his divinity and reach a higher level. But now, it had completely merged him with the remaining Great Si Ming. There was no distinction between them. At this moment, Lu Baiyan had become the purest solidifier. After completely devouring the power of the remnant, he turned into an extension of hell. The moment he completely embraced hell, Great Si Ming's destiny ushered in the fall. All the correction values were quickly distorted, causing his power to skyrocket again. The wearer's rank was instantly achieved, and it was still increasing. Come on, why sure? On both sides of Lu Baiyan's cracked face, a pair of evil eyes grew out again. Show me the power of the sword of calamity. Behind him, when the remnant's shadow of the giant tree appeared again, it was completely different from before. The once twisted and withered branches were now full of fruits. Countless remnant shadows of Lu Baiyan were pierced and hung on the branches. They were like corpses that were hanged on the tree of greed, swaying in the cold wind. The scarlet eyes looked up, countless mouths opened and closed, and a voice echoed in the air. It was full of malice and curses. Countless giant black butterflies rose from the branches. Their wings, which were covered with giant eyes, flapped and sprinkled sticky ink. When the ink fell into the soil, it was like a seed that took root and sprouted. It quickly grew into countless skinny and ferocious afterimages. They were no longer as fleeting as before. Instead, they were the fruits of nightmares that grew from hell. They were endless. It had surpassed the limit of the past. 2 times, 3 times, or even more. Under the entanglement of the roots of the branches, the national slayer crown cried silently and was dyed with a layer of darkness. The great Si Ming of hell raised his finger. The boundless pitch-black ocean began to boil and surged toward Huaisher. The whole hell came crashing down on him. He was the enemy of the whole world. This was the most terrifying thing about Great Si Ming. The endless black butterflies in the sky, the countless mutants on the ground. Even the air and the soil were hostile to him. He had become the master of this part of hell, the true ruler. As long as he took root in the soil, he could nibble away at the foundation of this realm and have endless power to squander. And Huaishur could not hide his disappointment. He looked at his opponent across the countless mutants. He was puzzled. Is it that powerful to have so many people? He asked curiously, "Do you know what day it is today?" Chapter 966. No one responded, but Huaishur had already taken out his phone from his pocket. He showed it. The screen lit up, showing the time. Friday. It was an odd number that made people happy. At that moment, the pitch-black cat of Calamity softly purred and slowly appeared on Huaishur's shoulder. It squatted on his shoulder and looked down at the surging tide with a gaze of contempt unique to felines. Soon, when Huaishur reached out his hand, it obediently jumped down from his shoulder and turned into an incomplete book and fell into his hand. War and Peace. Unlike the White of Peace, its cover was nightmarish black with a hint of scarlet. The Codex of War was unfolded here. At that moment, Huaishur felt as if he had reached out and grabbed a black hole. A terrifying suction force emerged from it, but what it devoured was not Huaishur's source form and divinity. Instead, it was Great Seeming's destiny, all the correction points that Huaishur had accumulated over a long period of time. From Xinhai to Danbua, from Little Page on Huaihai Road to the King of Danbua, and finally to the Sword of Calamity, all the correction points that he had created, accumulated, and accumulated. A total of 0.092%. Of course, compared to the entire world, it was not worth mentioning. But when this accumulated power to change the world was used to change the reality in front of him, this great power formed by the vicissitudes of life was enough to create a jaw-dropping miracle. This was its true usage. Like most authoritative relics, it transformed the void correction points obtained from correcting the world into a terrifying power that could change everything in front of him. At this moment, as the correction points were rapidly consumed, it dropped by half in an instant. As the Codex of War unfolded, the nightmare descended. Huaishur's ruins of End suddenly burst open. Within the cage of dreams, countless scarlet eyes appeared. They were like a burning ocean, filled with greed and resentment. The cold eyes stared at all the enemies. The steel crows spread their wings and rushed into the sky amidst the roaring thunder. Then, countless sacred marks appeared. Great Seeming's blessings fell. 1,866 steel crows turned into Een spirits, and then the silhouettes of hundreds of mountain ghosts appeared, followed by hundreds of young Arbiter Ming's divine marks. Under Huaishur's unreserved support, the army from Heaven's Inquisition Road reappeared. Not only that, when Beelzebub was included in the large group, the shadow of the Twilight Village descended from behind him. With a boom, the furnace of perpetual motion that had been sealed for so long was activated again. Hell that belonged to Huaishur was built here. When the eternal twilight breaks through the darkness, the huge engine from Helios was running again. Huaishur lifted a finger, and a mighty chime rang out from the heart of the eternal frost furnace, causing hell to roar. Using the steel city as a musical instrument, a majestic melody flowed out from within, surging and engulfing everything, shrouding everything under the blessing of supreme resonance. Huaishur slowly closed the book in his hand and raised his head with a smile. Now, who is on the side with more people? In the next moment, the light of steel and the sea of darkness collided. It set off an earth-shattering boom. In the midst of it, the sacred white horse neighed, stepping on the dazzling light, charging towards the fallen solidifiers, opening up endless darkness, tearing apart the eternal night, and descending the dazzling light of dawn. Virtue operated in this world. War and peace. Russell really loves you. Lu Baiyan's expression became more and more ferocious. This time, he didn't retreat. Instead, he raised his palm towards the galloping incarnation of virtue, and the countless roots of the surviving evil stabbed down like spears. Sparks flew. The galloping white horse cut through dozens of spears, and then mysteriously disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a giant deer that suddenly appeared. Following Huaishir's movements, axes, swords, spears, knives, and even giant hammers kept appearing. Even though they were far away, they were wrapped in supreme and bombarded continuously. But what was unexpected was Lu Baiyan's exquisite swordsmanship. Holding two sharp branches of the surviving evil in his hands, he dissolved all the thunderstorm-like attacks. He even took advantage of the victory to pursue and attack, faintly suppressing Huaishir's incarnation of origin form. He could even launch a counterattack, but the moment he destroyed the projection in front of him, he felt his feet suddenly become sluggish. Countless water vapor froze on his legs, and a chain stretched out from the darkness, grabbing his arm and locking him in place. Then, in the city of steel, a violent light appeared out of thin air. The boom was ear-piercing. A blazing thunderbolt appeared in Huaishir's hand out of thin air, and he threw it towards Lu Baiyan. Like a dragon soaring in the sky, it carried with it a vast and mighty majesty. The moment it was born, it had already locked onto Lu Baiyan's location. The mighty thunderbolt whizzed through the air, crossing the sea of ink and tearing apart all the forces in front of it, crushing them and directly colliding with the defense of the surviving evil. It exploded with a loud bang. A crack actually appeared on the indestructible branches, and a small withered branch fell. Blood as viscous as ink dripped from the fracture. When he felt this faint stabbing pain, Lu Baiyan raised his head in astonishment. Unbelievable. This was Ying Fangzhou's move. Then he saw the weapon that appeared in Huaishir's hand. Broken spear, passing water. I forgot to tell you, I've also taken on a part-time job as Xiangjuan. Huaishir stroked the strands of electricity wrapped around the broken spear and asked curiously, "How is it? Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" Before he even finished speaking, the light of thunder rose up again. With the support of the Codex of War, the dormant Xiangjuan's stigmata once again extended upwards. It found the mighty power of the Cloud Lord and sent down the light of punishment. The thunder whip slashed down. And so, the viscous sea of ink formed by countless mutants surged again, and a large hole was violently torn open. The branches of the surviving evil twitched and roared loudly. A burn mark appeared on Lu Baiyan's face, and he became more and more gloomy. That stubborn bastard. I was the one who saved him. More than once. He murmured hatefully, "It's useless to use his moves against me." On the branches of the surviving evil, countless afterimages twitched again, and hoarse voices rose and fell one after another. Shiha has yet to rise. What light does Ruohua have? The sun chariot had yet to set out. So why did Ruohua emit such a bright light? Heaven's inquisition changed again. The world was gloomy, and all things were shrouded in darkness. All light was forcefully swallowed up. The only light in the world seemed to be the hell tree that was shining brightly around Lu Baiyan. On the fingers that seemed to be hanging countless tragic corpses, each of the sinister branches emitted a cold, bloody light. It unreasonably wiped out all the light and returned it to itself. All the lightning dissipated in the darkness before it could appear, losing the foundation of its existence. In this hell, he was the only ruler. This was the essence of God's mark. Heaven's inquisition, the countless commands were just tools used by the great Ming to control hell. In this man-made hell, he was the true ruler. The darkness surged and rolled over. Wow, it's so dark, I'm so scared. Huaisher clapped his hands and praised, his tone monotonous. Speaking of which, you don't think I can't even afford a light bulb, do you? Speaking of which, there was an old senior who gave me something that glowed. At that moment, Liu Baiyan's expression changed abruptly, because a light that did not belong to him appeared behind him. It was a solemn and huge light wheel. It appeared so abruptly, like the sun jumping out of the horizon. In the mighty hymn, 16 light spokes slowly rotated, emitting a colorful RGB light that would make every man's heart flutter. It was like the center of heaven and earth, the core of hell, tearing the eternal darkness apart and spreading light. Then a mountain-like silhouette slowly rose from it, and a huge shadow covered the sky. It filled the entire hell. Holy, holy, holy! The fanatical hymn resounded in all directions. Then the huge monster curiously raised its head and grinned at the huge tree in front of it. Its bright red tongue brushed against the steel teeth, causing countless sparks to burst forth. Its eyes that were as huge as the sun and moon bloomed with the radiance of eternal hunger. It was time to eat. The beast of eternal hunger from hell launched a counterattack against the master of hell. In this region where the depth increased sharply, Bichimos, like a fish in water, opened its mouth and pounced on the tree. Countless scales and branches rubbed against each other, causing sparks to burst forth. Then, like a bone-gnawing stick, the steel teeth gnawed on the branches of the remnant evil. A scalp-numbing noise sounded. Meanwhile, the huge body had already laid down in a forward-charging posture without any scruples. The earth rumbled. The weight of the hammer of agony exerted unreservedly on hell, causing a crack to appear on Liu Baiyan's face. Leaving aside the source substance supply from Huaisher and the blessings from the Code of War, this was all thanks to the depth he created and the many corrosive species he spread, allowing Bichimos to smoothly grow to such an extent in a short period of time. It was almost reproducing the posture of the former final dragon, Behemoth. But what shocked Liu Baiyan even more was that the laws operating in Bichimo's body were completely different from the laws of the present realm. It was like a monster that sprouted from hell, but at the same time possessed the attributes of the present realm. It operated independently of the outside world and rejected all interference. It was only hunger and thirst, only eternal greed, that devoured everything, such a crude and cruel style, and such a highly efficient way of composition, caused a familiar figure to emerge in Liu Baiyan's consciousness. The creator who had disappeared in the abyss before the fall of heaven, and never returned after the fall of heaven until his death. Madame Chachel, long time no see, outside the tundra, Sharma sighed with emotion. I didn't expect you to leave such a work in the world. At this moment, after combining with the design from Gila, the final treasure bestowed to the mortal world by the Creator, Chachel, had arrived once again. Cold, cruel, and unreservedly, it launched an attack on the traitor. The projection of the surviving evil creature screamed in pain. A huge crack actually appeared on the huge tree trunk. Kang Huifeng knew. Why did you tilt to the southeast? Liu Baiyan covered the crack on his face and roared hoarsely. He once again operated Heaven's Inquisition, mobilizing all his power and gathering the fallen divinity of the third-level arbiter of life. Gong flew into a rage. Why did the southeast tilt? With the miracle of Gong new touching Mount Buzhou as the source code, this was an absolutely powerful attack at the cost of shattering hell. But even though such a huge amount of power had gathered, was close at hand, and was about to erupt, Bichimos still didn't care and clamped down on the projection beneath it. It was as if it wanted to press Liu Baiyan on the spot, even with its own weight. At that moment, the crisp sound of steel rubbing against each other sounded. It caused Liu Baiyan to turn his head abruptly. In Huaisher's hand, the magazine of Lord of the Flies opened. Surprise! Chapter 967. 6 emerald green bullets lay quietly in the roulette, glowing with a dreamlike brilliance, illuminating the corners of his mouth. When Huaishur shook his hand slightly and closed the magazine, the heavy and huge revolver in his hand also smiled along with Huaishur. It was as if something great had happened. It allowed people to empathize with the joy and happiness of a pistol. Now, when the pitch-black muzzle was slowly raised and aimed forward, the image of a blond young man appeared beside Huaishur. He was wearing a motorcycle jacket and a pair of worn-out boots, as if he had finally returned after a long journey. Beelzebub raised his hand and pulled down the sunglasses on his nose bridge. He smiled at his old friend, whom he had not seen for a long time. He greeted him with a sweet and pleasant voice. "Motherf *, did you miss me? Huaishur, pull the trigger." At that moment, the light of judgment from Osiris descended. It was a thin line, but it caused the world to darken. It was as if all the splendor and brilliance of the world had been condensed. Everywhere it passed, hell was cleanly cut open, and all obstacles were destroyed as easily as crushing dry weeds. Even the countless overlapping routes could not stop the descent of the light of judgment. They collapsed like bubbles and turned into dust. When the source substance that had undergone a qualitative change was activated in such a thorough way, the blessing from the King of Light descended from this dark hell. It gave all things the salvation of light. At the same time, it brought the cruel judgment of the god of the underworld. In the blink of an eye, a huge crack appeared on the huge body of the surviving evil. When the hole appeared, the light of judgment that had penetrated thousands of miles had already broken through layers of boundaries and dissipated in the neon lights of the polar night sky. It disrupted the aurora that filled the sky. Then the magazine spun. Huaishur pulled the trigger again. The second destructive light illuminated Lu Baiyan's face again. Then the third, fourth, fifth, when the 6 destructive lights rushed past, leaving behind lingering traces. Hell was already shattered into pieces by the overlapping trajectories of judgment. The sea of ink collapsed. The reflection of the evil remnant convulsed in pain as it welcomed destruction once again. Lu Baiyan froze in place. He lowered his head and peeked at his disintegrating body. He bent down, vomited blood, and knelt on the ground. He tried his best to maintain his consciousness, but he could not stop the collapse from spreading. What virtue does the luminous light have to give birth after death? What kind of virtue did Ming Yu have that she could be reborn after death? In an instant, one of the projections of great Si Ming created by the National Slayer crown collapsed, while Lu Baiyan's broken body was reborn. From a situation of certain death, he was resurrected. However, his originally pitch-black hair had turned white, and he looked old again. "You're the F** king, troublesome one." Huaishur lifted his foot and stomped down, trampling. Lu Baiyan's body sank into the soil again. Then Huaishur expressionlessly raised the sword of virtue in his hand and slashed down. Blood splattered everywhere. A sluggish head flew into the air, its lips still opening and closing. There seemed to be something in the blood that flowed out. Huaishur suddenly lost his footing, and the body he was stepping on suddenly turned into ashes. Meanwhile, Lu Baiyan's last clone of great Si Ming quickly solidified from the state of an afterimage. He gave up his body in exchange for his last life. This time, the moment he was reborn, the old, white-haired man raised his hand, and the last of the black butterflies gathered at his fingertips, forming a pitch-black blade. It blocked Huaishur's slash. Huaishur took a step forward expressionlessly. She lowered her sword and looked down at the wretched face of the man. 2 times is enough. Huai Shi impatiently urged, as if he was scolding an immature child. You can't trick a lunchbox like this. Lu Baiyan, that's enough. Can't you just die obediently? You're dreaming. Lu Baiyan's face twitched violently, and he looked ferocious and crazy. His skinny body suddenly slammed forward, and a white, jade-like color emerged from his body, turning into iron and stone, trying to knock him away. But he felt as if he had crashed into a speeding truck, and he could feel the terrifying heat from Huai Shi's body. His skin was as red as steel. Over limit. Then 3 thunderbolts overlapped, and the loud sound of the sky collapsing spread. Huai Shi's raised left hand went over the blade and smashed onto Lu Baiyan's face, completely destroying his parry. Lu Baiyan staggered back. It's time to leave Lu Baiyan. Huai Shi dragged the blade forward and told him, You've wasted enough time. You have to learn to say goodbye to the audience. Never. The white-haired man stood firm again, blood seeping out of his nose and mouth, but his expression was as ferocious as a beast, and his eyes were bloodshot. You're still here, wishful thinking. What answered him was the falling blade of the axe. In an instant, the thin wisp of ink was defeated, and then the long spear drove straight in. Lu Baiyan stretched out his hand and gripped the tip of the spear tightly, ignoring the sharp weapon that would cut his arm to pieces. Blood turned into ink, forming a sharp blade from his right hand, and stabbed down. The blood-colored long sword was blocked by the sword of virtue again. It was light and agile, like moving clouds and flowing water, deflecting this unworthy attack. In Huai Shi's hand, the outline of the axe of wrath appeared, and he chopped down. He chopped off his last right hand. The broken limb flew up, but Lu Baiyan didn't hesitate at all. Like a beast, he opened his mouth and bit at Huai Shi's throat with his sharp teeth. The hammer of pain swung out. A loud bang. The broken body flew out, and before he landed, Huai Shi's figure flashed in front of him. In the blink of an eye, shadow burials shuttled back and forth several times, but he couldn't open up the slightest distance. Resentment was reversed. Amidst the hungry cries of the crows, it pierced through his chest and nailed him to the ground. Lu Baiyan opened his mouth and spat out the broken organs, but his eyes were still fierce. In the sluggish dizziness, this hatred didn't dissipate, but became heavier. It almost made his eyes burst out of their sockets. Huai Shi raised his foot and stepped on his body. Holding the hilt with both hands, the blade pressed down and penetrated his body inch by inch. But Lu Baiyan still stubbornly raised his head, as if he wanted to prop up his body again. With his broken teeth, he bit Huai Shi's throat. Why are you so stubborn as to seek your own death, Lu Baiyan? Huai Shi looked down indifferently and asked coldly, Why are you unwilling to die? Lu Baiyan's bleeding mouth twitched, as if he was amused. Yes, why? Why am I the only one in such a sorry state? I've wasted my entire life. I want to make a difference, but I'm afraid of being tainted. I want to stay away from disputes, but I'm unwilling to give up on my ambitions. I want to become a beautiful jade, but I know that with my ability, I can only be an inkstone that's as dirty as ink, a decoration used to decorate. Why am I the only one who can't achieve anything? Is it because I'm still alive? I clearly fought to the last moment. The dying beast roared angrily, enduring the grief and pain that had accumulated for 70 years. It asked hoarsely, Do we really have to end up like this? Just because I'm still alive? He roared miserably and used all his strength. I've never betrayed the Republic. In the silence, only the sound of the wind in the distance and the flying snow powder fell. Huai Shi closed his eyes in disappointment. What about your student, Lu Baiyan? He asked softly. Where did they go? Lu Baiyan's expression froze. The corner of his eyes twitched involuntarily. It was as if he was recalling those nightmarish scenes from 70 years ago. The collapsed buildings, the tilted world, the kingdom of heaven that fell from the sky, the burning flames, the wails and cries of his companions, and those students that he loved and guided. Corpses were in a mess. His empty eyes reflected his own pale face. They were all dead. They died in front of him. All his companions, all his students, everything that he had protected and was proud of had come to an end that day. They were buried in the ruins. They sank to hell. In the silence, the teacher holding the sword asked again, puzzled, "But why are you still alive?" Lu Baiyan's lips opened with difficulty, but he could not make a sound. Just like 70 years ago. He fell to the ground in a daze. He had clearly forgotten to breathe, but he could not help but tremble. In the spreading pool of blood, Mathers looked back. After holding the brim of his hat toward the deceased, he walked past him and gradually disappeared into the distance. It was as if he did not see him, because he did not resist. From the beginning to the end, he did not stand up. He just watched everything happen and allowed the situation to be irreversible. He allowed them to take away his most precious thing. He did not say a word, whether it was Luo Su or Huaishir. Neither of them actually cared about what had happened to Lu Baiyan that day. What they despised was the result of him being in such a sorry state. "Why did your students die before you?" Huaishir asked softly. "Answer me, why didn't you avenge them?" In the silent snow, there was only a labored breathing. Lu Baiyan looked at him in a daze. It was as if he could not understand his words. "Look, you had already failed your duty before the betrayal, didn't you?" Huaishir said, "You didn't make a choice, so you didn't choose to stand on the side of the Republic. You chose to watch from the sidelines. Unfortunately, watch from the sidelines is the most disgusting of the countless pronunciations of betrayal. In the end, you watched your students die and ruined your own future with your own hands. They gave up their ideal legacy in exchange for this meaningless rest of their lives. They breathed the air that their sacrifices had exchanged for, ate the sweet breakfast that their blood had exchanged for, and lived a peaceful life that they had dedicated to everyone in this world. Then they were filled with resentment and unwillingness. They told others that they were innocent. There could be thousands of reasons for a mistake, but there was no excuse for betrayal. It was not an act. It was an irreversible result. It was enough to deny everything that had happened in the past. Do you know?" Huaishir raised her head to look at the empty night sky and the stars that twinkled in the darkness. Chachel, Orton, Ingfangzhou, Vitali, many of them are dead. There are also many people who have waited their entire lives for the day when celestial genealogy is rebuilt. But in the end, they still believe that their sacrifices will not be in vain. One day, the treasures they left behind for this world will have value. I'm ashamed to receive their unreserved trust because I clearly haven't done anything for them. But when they look at me, it's as if they're looking at their own future, full of anticipation. They believe that I can achieve something, help me, and reach this point, so I feel that I must do something for them. At the very least, I can't let them continue to wait. I want to rebuild the kingdom of heaven's lineage, and I also want to restore the former utopia. Not only for them, but also for me. Now, this day is coming. Huaishir lowered his eyes and looked down with the stars in the sky. "Please move aside. Lu Baiyan, you're blocking my ideal." Chapter 968. The moment Huaishir lowered his eyes, Lu Baiyan finally noticed the coldness that was slowly engulfing him. It was like a tranquil sea of ice, coldly pulling at him, robbing him of all his strength to struggle, and sending him to the coldness in the deepest part of the darkness, something called death, something called judgment. After 70 years, it had once again appeared in front of him, accompanied by the figures that had passed away in the past. Under the vast night sky, countless sparkling stars quietly sprinkled down. The figures that had appeared countless times in his dreams and memories seemed to have returned from the past. They coldly looked down at his face, full of contempt. Why, his empty eyes were stung by those gazes. Lu Baiyan's expression convulsed and gradually twisted. Why do I have to be a traitor? I just hesitated for a moment. I just couldn't do anything. He screamed shrilly and struggled with all his might. Dried blood flowed out from the wounds on his arms again, forming ugly graffiti with difficulty. Using up the last of his source form, he tore his own chest apart. He forcefully tore off the flesh that had been pierced through by hatred. Ignoring the thousands of holes in his body, he activated Shadow Burial's shuttle. But there was no more power for him to squander. He only ran for 2 meters before being squeezed out of the shadows under Huaishir's gaze. He rolled on the ground, staggered up, and ran wildly on his hands and feet. He ran into the distance, towards the door that was already very close. Beelzebub! Huaishir calmly raised his gun. Don't kill him. Okay. The youth's phantom grinned malevolently. In an instant, Lu Baiyan's left leg exploded into a bloody mist. His calf separated from his body, flew up, and fell down. Lu Baiyan fell to the ground and raised his right leg with difficulty, trying to support himself. Huaishir pulled the trigger again. Bang! The knee of his right leg was also shattered. He fell into the melted snow and mud. He was still convulsing and struggling. He could no longer feel pain, but in the dizziness, those illusions seemed to become clearer. They stood on either side of him, quietly watching all of this, admiring his ugly appearance. I'm sorry. He apologized incoherently, but did not know what to say. They hid their faces in the mud and frozen ice in fear, not daring to look again. He could only instinctively use the blood drawn on his arms to crawl on the ground, fleeing for his life. Little by little, he wriggled on the ground and moved forward. Goodbye, everyone, he muttered to himself. I'm going on a trip. Go to a place where I can go just like that. He dragged his broken body and crawled with all his might towards the place where he could escape pain and go to hell. Even if he was despised by others and suffered eternal torture, it didn't matter. I'm sorry. Lu Baiyan kept repeating. He reached out and tried to touch the door frame of hell. Finally, he saw the figure waiting behind the door. The smiling woodman lowered his head and stretched out his palm to him. He was stunned, as if he was pleasantly surprised. He reached out his hand expectantly, wanting to hold that glimmer of fallen hope. But no matter what, he couldn't get any closer, because someone had grabbed his right ankle and was pulling him backward cruelly. He was dragged back to the human world under the indifferent gaze of countless eyes. He was stunned. He screamed in horror, shouted vaguely, and sobbed. He tried his best to kick, and finally broke free from the pull of that hand. Once again, he crawled towards hell. Bit by bit, slowly and painfully, he crawled towards the door of liberation. Then he was pulled back again, once again, until he lost all his strength and stopped in front of the door in despair. He no longer had the strength to hold that hand. Beside him, Huaishir looked down calmly. It's time to say goodbye. He said, Lu Baiyan, you have to say goodbye to your friend. Lu Baiyan murmured blankly, I still have. I'm sorry, your voice is a little soft. I can't hear you clearly. Huaishir rolled up his sleeves and folded them up, revealing his arm. But it's okay, you can continue whatever you say. But no matter what you say, the result won't change. On the right hand that turned from flesh to metal, the pale alchemy fire lit up, illuminating Huaishir's calm face and his silent eyes. In the darkness, there was only a distant silence, It's time, Lu Bai Yin. At that moment, there was a painful scream, as if his soul was being torn apart. It cruelly ravaged his will, bringing about the suffering and torture in the furnace. The burning iron hand had already pierced into his body. The forging began. Great Siming's talent, Yang birth, was activated, like plucking a ripe fruit from a tree. When Huaishur pulled out his hand, he pulled out the remaining broken roots and the crown carved from white jade. Under the burning of the alchemy fire, all the sediment in the abyss dissipated silently. The miracle of purification transformed again, turning into an ancient book from Huaishur's hand. Then Huaishur reached out his hand again, causing the pain to come again, and the suffering to last forever. Just like that, he searched the cracked soul inch by inch. Holding it tightly, he pulled out the crystal of heaven's inquisition, a jade amulet overflowing with clouds and flowing light. Finally, he reached out his hand for the third time. Finally, he grasped his soul tightly, amidst the shrill and hoarse screams. He cast flames on his soul, forcibly manipulating all his source substances to shrink inwards, until finally it formed a pitch-black ink stick. Pulled out. The moment Huaishur let go, the broken body fell to the ground silently. There was no light in the dull eyes, only emptiness left. Sticky saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth, mixed with strands of blood. His soul had welcomed the destruction. But it wasn't over yet. In the silence, Huaishur pulled out the axe of wrath, aimed it at his neck, and raised it. It was just like what Russell had said. Coldly and mercilessly, he would carry out the duty of Great Siming, using the most straightforward and cruel method to destroy the traitor. Only then could he demonstrate the existence of justice and justice. Just like that, under the observation mirror, in front of the gates of hell, under the witness of the whole world, the judgment had arrived. Slash! Viscous blood spurted out, crossing the gates of hell, as if landing on the face of the phantom. It made the eternal smile on Woodman's face turn gloomy. Until now, Huaishur raised his head and looked behind the door coldly. Didn't you want it? He lifted his leg and kicked the thing on the ground over. Here for you. The head rolled and stopped at Woodman's feet. It slowly stopped. This was the answer from celestial genealogy. At the same time, in a different place, in the reflection of the fast food restaurant, Woodman sighed regretfully. What a pity, he died. He transformed from pain and followed his own will to choose hell. What kind of fruit will this despair brought about by the shame and self-denial that has been brewing for 70 years bear? He said, just a little bit more, and he could have become our companion. Or you can also change your method. Russell suggested sincerely, if you really care about brotherhood so much, you can accompany him. If he can't accompany you, if you're in a hurry, you can sign up now. I can ask Huaishur to give you a discount. Ha, you're humorous, as always. Woodman shook his head. Golden Dawn is not like you, becoming a place that begins to weaken because of a little setback. We still have a long way to go. Don't worry, it won't be too long. It will be over soon. Russell shook his head. That day will come very soon. Woodman, before that, no matter what you want, I can guarantee that you won't be able to get anything. It sounds scary. Woodman rubbed his eyes as if he was wiping away non-existent tears. I will start to look forward to it. Russell, however, you're wrong about one thing. He paused for a moment and no longer hid the ferocity in his smile. We prefer things that we don't have. Take it yourself. At this moment, on the snowy plains, Woodman looked up with the same smile. Huaishur, to thank you for your gift. He said, I also have a gift for you. In between his slowly opened hands, a light screen appeared, revealing a scenery that Huaishur was extremely familiar with. The quiet campus, the echoing bell, and the crowds coming and going. The ivory tower, above the light screen, The empty sky shattered with a loud bang. Pairs of huge and empty eyes appeared from behind the shattered sky and looked down. Countless rays of light lit up in the darkness. Those were stars. The stars from hell fell with a loud bang. Destruction descended on the peaceful academy. An ear-piercing alarm instantly sounded in every corner. Then layers of defenses appeared out of thin air and shrouded every building. Emergency measures were activated. All the students who were doing activities or watching the live broadcast were pulled by the main framework of creation to the 6 deepest shelters. Then, according to age, sequence, and faculty composition, they were separated into groups of 3 to prevent the spread of the danger. And the surging flames and chaos had already spread out from this city that had been quiet for a long time. A large hand appeared from outside the crack at the border, clenched into a fist, and slowly closed in. Then the 5 fingers opened, and countless seeds of hell were thrown into the world below, sowing the seeds of death and extinction. On the cracked square, the creator named Mathers looked up, reached out, touched the brim of his hat, and knocked on the gong with his cane. In an instant, the twin spirals spread out from nothing. With the bloodline of the abyss as a link, a domain descended, isolating the inside from the outside. The inner formation was activated, and then, behind the crack, the most glorious star that burned with layers of flames finally fell from the sky and landed on the ground. The vast border suddenly trembled, unbearably heavy. 36 rays of light spread out in all directions, echoing from an ancient chant. The skinny old man that looked like he was made of steel raised his face. Based on this piece of land in a foreign land. The Heretic King. Chapter 969. Right at this moment, when the whole world's attention was attracted to that wasteland, the stairway to heaven in the land of dreams quietly opened up the path to the ivory tower. Compared to the showy exhibition matches, I still prefer to kill with a single blow. Woodman's phantom strolled on the cracked square with his hands in the pockets of his breeches. He whistled. What a beautiful place! The flowers are blooming, and the birds are singing. The happy children are about to fall into the flames of hell. The Heretic King stepped forward silently and faced the void in front of him. He punched with all his might. The heavenly drum sounded, and the entire border shook violently again. Countless cracks spread in front of the fist, and the framework of the Lord of Creation collapsed. In the vice principal's office, Isaac's figure flashed for a moment, disappeared quickly, and reappeared in the same place. When he looked around at the exact same scene, his expression became extremely gloomy. The time jump failed. He raised his right hand and clenched it tightly. His figure became illusory, and then 6 figures that looked exactly like him walked out of the void. The timeline was folded. He made 6 of himself appear at the same time, without interfering with each other. However, when the 6 figures of Isaac disappeared at the same time, they appeared in 6 identical offices at the same time. No matter what, there was no way to cross this short distance and reach the outside world. When Isaac clasped his hands together, the dazzling light of thousands of suns burst out at the same time. The terrifying power of 6 nuclear fission swept through, but it was limited by his power within 100 meters. The effect was the countless expansion and contraction of the light of destruction in an instant. The entire office was engulfed in the high temperature and instantly evaporated into dust. But behind the cracked walls, there were identical offices everywhere, whether it was above or below. Then the broken offices began to rapidly grow, shrink, and return to their original state. Mirror cage, Isaac murmured gloomily. It seems that I'm really important to make Mr. Bennett come. In front of him, an old man slowly appeared. His eyes were green, and his vigorous white beard was drooping. He was wearing a pitch-black robe, but on his wrist there were prayer beads that were completely different from the Holy Spirit system. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Repent, and the shore is at hand. Like an enlightened monk, the newcomer put his palms together, and a sacred glow appeared in his eyes. Accept the enlightenment and return to the righteous path. Isaac, the sea of bitterness is boundless. Isaac sneered. You are the sea of bitterness itself, Bennett. The peak of the primordial road, the embodiment of primordial chaos, and the essence of hell, the miracle he grasped was the peak of the fifth step of the primordial road, abyss of nothingness Abu-Su. But at this moment, the one who inherited the essence of hell revealed an incomparably gentle expression. Pinching Flowers smiled. There was no doubt that it was the peaceful expression of the enlightened. After comprehending compassion and truth, and seeing through the desire realm, color realm, and formless realm, he achieved great enlightenment. He could almost be called a monk like Buddha. However, the unconcealable hellish aura on his body made him seem like an evil demon. Don't be impatient, Isaac. We still have a lot of time, Bennett said calmly. Then today let's imitate the sages and the awakened. We'll hold an open ceremony here. What we are going to discuss is lay down the butcher's knife and become a demon immediately. Behind him, the shadow of chaos had completely engulfed the entire office, turning it into an isolated hell where time and space were completely cut off. Looks like things are going well on Bennett's side. Woodman whistled and looked in another direction. What about you, Mathers? Work harder. Don't keep capsizing in strange places. Mathers didn't pay any attention to him. His whole body was tense. He only focused on the front of the auditorium. In the small square, there was a fashionable old lady wearing a fur coat. Under the striped fur coat was an extremely gaudy classic red and blue color scheme. Her meticulously curled and permed hairstyle gave off a strong old-fashioned feeling, as if it was a classic outfit from the last century. She was like an auntie in a tourist group. Why am I, an old lady, still kidnapped to work overtime in this lousy school at such an old age? The old lady complained unhappily. She picked up the potato chips in the bag, threw them into her mouth, and chewed loudly. Hey, Mathers, I remember that we didn't fight back then, right? Miss Yanko, long time no see. Mathers sighed softly. I didn't expect to meet you here. After so many years, you are still as beautiful as before. You call me an old scumbag the moment you open your mouth. No wonder you are one of the 5 scumbags in the same generation as Russell. Yoko Kusanagi unhappily picked up the bag of potato chips and poured the remaining chips into her mouth. After wiping her mouth, she threw the bag aside. Then, let's cut the crap. Gomez, Turgan, Bamra, Jaden, Godzilla, Baraba, she suddenly asked, which one do you like? Mathers' expression froze, but he was not given a chance to choose. Countless loud roars burst out from behind the tour group's ante. Huge shadows slowly rose into the air, accompanied by countless ear-piercing sounds of steel rubbing against each other. Sparks flew. Steel skeletons, metal organs, ether blood, mimicry armor, and finally, a hideous appearance. Countless mechanical monsters that seemed to be able to support the heavens and the earth descended upon this narrow border. Shadows covered Mathers' face. A drop of cold sweat seeped out from the back of his neck. Even if they had already made preparations, this scale, wasn't it a little too exaggerated? Amidst the continuous roars, Yoko Kusanagi lowered her head and lit a cigarette. She sighed happily. As expected, the aesthetics of Ingzhou's art is special. At this moment, in the sky, the brilliant light of Bhagwan reappeared. It shrouded countless students and hid them deep in the illusion. After Krishna protected all the students, the counterattack from the ivory tower began. The white doves that were urgently recalled from the abyss began to scatter their legions. They no longer cared about the appearance of the victims and began to fight with all their might. The entire city was in turmoil and constantly burst out with rumbles of collapse. But the light of resistance did not stop. It illuminated the darkness. 1 minute had passed since the attack began. There were only 2 minutes left before the astronomical assembly broke through the blockade of the land of dreams. Ignoring the pressing time, Woodman stretched out his hand and took the ancient book from the hands of his subordinate. The spirit of the book reappeared and transformed into a strong man with a smoking pipe in his mouth. He wore a tall felt hat on his head and held a cane. His face was haggard and pale. His aquiline nose was thin and long, and his gray eyes were so sharp that they seemed to be able to see through all falsehoods and lies. "It's your turn, Mr. Holmes." Woodman smiled and handed over the parchment in his hand. Then, the spirit revealed a look of disgust as if he had eaten feces. "To be honest, compared to your side, I prefer the other side." The man with the pipe shook his head. Although he said so, he still put on his monocle and opened the parchment in his hand. Then, on the empty parchment, a complicated and detailed structural diagram of the entire city quickly appeared. From top to bottom, even the rooms hidden in the secret apparatus were not missed. Countless structural diagrams flashed and tumbled. However, behind the monocle, the gray eyes moved quickly, not letting go of any details or oversights. In the end, it fixed its gaze on a huge building. "The thing you want is here." The man with the pipe threw the parchment over in annoyance. "According to the original agreement, you have one last chance to make me work for you." After saying so, he dissipated and returned to the ancient book. Woodman smiled and closed the parchment in his hand. "Let's go, my dear friend." He hummed a song and waved to the heretic king beside him. He walked briskly. "Our time is limited. There are still surprises waiting ahead." A gate opened in front of them. Behind the gate was a dark world swaying in the wind and rain as if it had lost all light. Only countless gray buildings were immersed in the surging tide. Under the deep water was hell, the sunken old campus. "It's useless, Woodman." In the snowy plains in front of the gates of hell, Weischer looked coldly at the scene on the screen and shook his head in disdain. "If you think that Russell's lair will not be guarded at all, then that's the real joke. Even if you flatten the entire border, what can you do? At most, you can add some homework for the engineering department. It's useless." "Is that so?" Woodman's smile remained. "It seems that you don't know your greatest weakness. Why, sure, you poor homeless people think that celestial genealogy is your shelter. You have a seemingly glorious wish to warm each other, as if you have found the meaning of life. But you have never thought of one thing." Woodman sneered and asked, "Does celestial genealogy really belong to you?" In the projection on the screen, the heretic monarch smashed down like a meteor, creating a straight path through the countless aberrations and bizarre phenomena. Opening up the ocean of hell, tearing through layers of obstacles, he stepped forward and destroyed all the tentacles and strange limbs that stretched out from the dark clouds. Just like that, the attackers from the Golden Dawn descended straight down along the empty path. In the end, there was a huge gate in front of them. At that moment, Russell's expression changed, and he almost stood up. Weischer also looked as if he had been struck by lightning. In front of Woodman's other projection, countless preset defenses came into contact with each other. In the end, the huge and heavy gate opened with a bang. Behind it was an alchemy array that was as complicated as a giant tree. There were also countless ancient books that fluttered in the air, and in the center, under the protection of countless historical records, there was a solemn and majestic silhouette. Woodman laughed mockingly. Russell, that guy, actually left him in the old campus and hid him in this sunken hell. Does he think that this is foolproof? Long time no see. He fanatically spread his arms and stared at the last wreckage of the kingdom of heaven in front of him, which was also the most honorable inheritance certificate of celestial genealogy. The Book of Destiny. Silence, a long silence. Weisher looked at him in a daze. He was very careful to determine if he was serious, but when he looked at that ferocious and happy face, his expression twitched, and he looked away awkwardly. After a long time, he could not help but cover his mouth. Buffed. He laughed out loud. Chapter 970. Just as Weisher was about to burst into laughter, the ivory tower, the old campus, amidst the layers of blockades, under the glorious array, a familiar figure slowly appeared and looked up. An old man with waist-length white hair was wearing a black, formal suit and handmade leather shoes. His cufflinks and tie were meticulous. Russell, it's not too late to stop now, Woodman. Russell's phantom flicked the ash from his cigarette and stared at his opponents in front of him. He smiled mockingly. Otherwise you'll die a horrible death. You want to fool me with that illusion, Russell? Woodman sneered and shook his head, exposing his disguise. I'm not so bad as to mistake you for everything. You're playing the empty fort strategy. You've got the wrong place. As he spoke, he waved his hand. The silent heretic king stepped forward and punched. After destroying the remnant illusion cleanly, Kieran's attack landed on the tremors in front of him without holding back, causing the tree-like Vanes village to break apart. Countless books fell from the sky, and cracks appeared on the covers of the books. Woodman had already reached out and grabbed the ancient book that was slowly falling from the sky. His hands were trembling with excitement, and his eyes were almost glowing. But soon, the ancient book in his hand began to shrink. Its thickness was rapidly becoming thinner. In the end, it became a broken book full of cracks. Woodman's smile gradually stiffened. It was the spirit of the deacon that had signed a contract with Russell back. Then, confession. In that instant, the cover of the book in Woodman's hand slowly opened. What poured out was the grief and frustration that had accumulated for 70 years. Eternal pain, an irreparable mistake, an unbearable loss, and an unacceptable result. It was an emotion called repentance, as well as the terrifying light that threatened to destroy itself and the world along with it. The huge old campus trembled violently in an instant. The surging tide boiled. The dark clouds in the sky shattered, and everything collapsed inwards with a loud bang. The self-destruction mechanism that had been set up 70 years ago was instantly activated. Thus, a huge amount of source substance turned into the light of destruction. Under the command of repentance, everything wailed silently. Evaporation. In the blink of an eye, the grand and gloomy old campus rapidly shrank into a singularity of nothingness. Whether it was Woodman's phantoms or the elites of Golden Dawn, they were all swallowed up and disappeared. But soon after, the small singularity let out a loud sound. It slowly expanded with great difficulty and was forcefully pushed open from the inside. A badly damaged figure fell out from it and tumbled back to the floor of the ivory tower. He coughed out golden red blood. The dignified body that used to look like it was carved out of gold was now covered in cracks. King of heretics. The expert who used to be insufferably arrogant had now lost both his legs, one of his eyes, and even half of his body. He was severely injured. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Russell laughed, ignoring the staff in the fast food restaurant, who were looking at him like he was an idiot. He grinned at the phantom in the window. How does it feel to be smart, Woodman? Woodman's face, somber and smiling, had disappeared. It was replaced by spasms and distortions. They were as ugly as evil spirits. Russell, ignoring the fact that he was an illusory phantom, he reached out to grab the old bastard's collar and roared uncontrollably, "Where is the Book of Destiny? Where did the Book of Destiny go?" "Oh, are you talking about this?" Russell raised his right hand. In his palm, an ancient book appeared again, exuding a real and dignified aura. "Do you want it?" He smiled and handed the book over. "For you." Woodman stiffened in disbelief. But right after that, Russell opened his hands and took out one book after another, then another, then another. They were all the books of destiny. In the end, a small mountain of books of destiny were stacked together and placed on the table. He pushed it towards Woodman. "You should have said so earlier. If you wanted it, I would have given it to you. After all, you can have as many of these things as you want. Why go through so much trouble?" Woodman couldn't understand. He looked at him blankly, and then looked at the pile of books of destiny on the table. The phantom almost shattered. "Why? It's all fake anyway. It doesn't matter." Russell waved his hand without a care. He exposed the truth so openly and happily. "After all, it's been fake since 70 years ago. If I knew you wanted it, I could have given each of you Golden Dawn a book. Then, everyone would be orthodox celestial genealogy. Wouldn't that be perfect? This thing is standard on our side. Why sure, do you hear me? Why don't you take out your book and let the seniors take a look?" On the snowy plains, Huaisher shrugged helplessly. He raised his hand and opened his book of destiny in front of Woodman, admiring his dumbfounded expression. He handed the book over. "Here, do you want it?" he said. "Here you go." Woodman's expression twitched violently. His eyes had already turned scarlet. He roared and roared. Without caring about his manners, the phantom waved his hand and violently tried to knock away the book in Huaisher's hand. It passed through. Huaisher was embarrassed. "You didn't want this." He said seriously, "You can't blame me for not giving it to you. How long do you want to have *King lie to me with this piece of junk?" Woodman roared. "Russell, where is the Book of Destiny? How would I know about that kind of thing?" Russell flicked the ash from his cigarette and said indifferently, "Whoever wants to pick it up can pick it up. Anyway, I'm not interested. I threw it away long ago." "Impossible," Woodman denied. "Then what was placed in the ivory tower for 70 years? I can clearly feel it. I can feel it. How could it be a fake? How could a fake fool the entire world for 70 years? Whether it was Golden Dawn, Celestial Genealogy members, or even the Directorate and the Continuation Academy, they had all used various methods to verify the authenticity of the Book of Destiny. How could it be a fake?" Luo Su whistled and looked at his nimble fingers. He sighed. "Well, it's all thanks to my superb forging skills. Oh, right. Do you still remember what level I was at when Heavenly State fell?" Woodman was stunned. He recalled carefully. When Heavenly State fell, Russell seemed to be still a level 4. Such a sudden and drastic change. If it wasn't for Russell finding the Book of Destiny at the critical moment and advancing to level 5, forcibly stabilizing the situation in the ivory tower and preserving some vitality for celestial genealogy, everyone might not have been able to survive today. But let me tell you another secret. Russell leaned close to his ear and whispered softly, "Actually, including my advancement back then, it was all fake." Woodman's expression twitched. It was not only ferocious, but also dull. His eyes stared at the man in front of him as if he wanted to devour him. To be precise, it should be said that from the beginning, the entire truth wasn't announced to the public. Russell whistled, beaming with joy. As everyone knows, the apex of the Twilight Road is Heimdall, who represents military power and control, and Mimir, who represents strategy and wisdom. Actually, this itself is a cover, an illusion used to hide the truth. Because once the truth is revealed, everyone will be afraid and isolated. Instead, it's better to hide it and let the students and disciples know. Thus, full of anticipation and mischief, Russell smiled and leaned close to Woodman's face, carefully scrutinizing his appearance. Guess what the real name of Mimir is? Now that things have come to this, what else could it be? Isn't strategy a synonym for conspiracy? Wasn't wisdom and trickery the twin brother of the same body? Truth. Is it so different from lies? Mimir? There's no need for such a glorious name, because this is the embodiment of evil in the Norse gods, the symbol of the dark side of war, the essence of human malice and lies, and the master of all illusions and falsehoods. Not only does it have to toy with the opponent, but it also has to deceive, use, and control its own people. At that moment, a hoarse voice came out of Woodman's mouth. He finally understood the truth that had been hidden for countless years and was furious. Loki, yes, yes, yes. The master of fire, and Lies nodded vigorously, widening his eyes, clenching his fists, and shouting excitedly. How is it? Isn't it interesting? Isn't it fun? Aya, even if Kadia disdains me to no end, the feeling of having everyone run around in circles with a single lie is so satisfying that I can't stop. Thank you, Woodman. He offered a grateful smile, almost shedding tears. Thank you for your cooperation and performance. I've been waiting for this day for 70 years. Starting from 70 years ago, he had been waiting for this day, this moment to come. This was the necessary condition to become Mimir. Through a comprehensive and exquisite strategy to change the situation, achieve success, gain everyone's recognition, and become a true leader. Finally, unearth an unquestionable truth from hell, completely combine with it, and transform into a synonym for mystery and wisdom. Not all of the above were lies. At least, except for the last one, they were all the truth. But in fact, even this was the masterpiece of the first-generation King of Dusk, Loki. In the advancement ceremony, what needed to be offered was never the truth. It was a lie that everyone believed to be true. The more people who believed it, the more far-reaching the waves would be, the greater the impact, and the more abundant the destiny would be. And this was the decision Russell made when the Republic was divided 70 years ago, taking a risk. Just like that, he stood under the collapsing sky and told a big lie. Everyone, don't worry. The Book of Destiny is not lost. I've found it and kept it safe. Look, there are also videos and witnesses. As everyone knew, videos could not be photoshopped. How could it be fake? No one was willing to believe that it was fake. Ingenious arrangements, credible witnesses, and even meticulously planned tests. The realization of every step made this lie more perfect. The more people who believed in it, the more real the hope that was built on a lie would be. When everyone knew that the Book of Destiny was kept in the Ivory Tower, then the Book of Destiny is in the Ivory Tower would become the truth. The trust of countless people turned the illusion into reality. It became the crown of the current King of Lies. Chapter 9, 71. Now, 70 years of preparation and hard work had finally welcomed the harvest. It wasn't just Golden Dawn's fiasco. It was this disguise that had been accumulated over time and had long been perfect. At this moment, even if Woodman stood up and announced to the world, the Book of Destiny in Russell's hands is fake, no one would believe it. Everyone would think that it was Mimir who, through wisdom and strategy, caused Golden Dawn to suffer heavy losses and sounded the horn of celestial genealogy's reorganization. Foresight, foresight, and foresight. It was really amazing. Didn't Shirt take out the Book of Destiny just now? This time, Russell had transferred an important asset in advance. He actually hid the Book of Destiny on his student. It was really amazing. What? Russell is Loki? Don't joke, friend. Although this old man is a little cheap, a little mean, and occasionally a little too inhumane, a little black-hearted, and a lot of bastards, how could he be a bad guy? Right. Just like that, through acting skills and tricks, he successfully created an unshakable character and image. Since 70 years ago, he had been preparing for this day, relying on lies, relying on trickery, relying on a heart full of hatred and anger, careful preparations, and planning day and night. He replaced the established protagonist and finally became the hero who turned the tide. This moment belonged to him, even if it was just this place, even if Woodman was the only one who knew. Do you know, I like the stage. Russell smiled. When the spotlight shines over, everything will become bright and beautiful, and everyone will be intoxicated in beautiful illusions. As long as you wear a mask, no one will care what the person under the costume is. When the horn is blown, each of us will have our own role. He shook his head mockingly. Who is the protagonist? Who is the supporting role? Who is the villain? Who is the cannon fodder? Long before the play began, it was already destined. Don't think about stealing the show, friend. Take the bento and leave obediently. He said, you have to learn to adapt to the times. Without the Book of Destiny, you can't inherit the revision value of utopia. You want to rebuild the celestial genealogy? Woodman looked coldly at Russell and sneered. You're dreaming. If you have a dream, you have to do it. Whatever happens after you wake up, you can talk about it after you wake up. Russell leaned back on the bench and revealed a mysterious expression. Besides, how do you know if I've found the Book of Destiny in these 70 years? Woodman's expression froze. Russell laughed again. Wow, why did you believe it again? The old man grinned viciously. It can't be. You already know that I'm Loki, and you still believe that I'll tell you the truth? Woodman, you're so gentle. By the way, you can make another guess. He paused and asked mysteriously, am I really Loki? Or was this another of Mimir's disguises? Or perhaps the real Mimir is actually another appearance of the great god Zeus? You've won this round, Russell. Woodman suppressed the anger in his heart and said coldly, I hope you can keep winning. Remember, the game between us will be very long. As long as you lose once, it's enough to let everything you have fall to pieces in hell. I'm looking forward to how long a dream maintained by a lie can last. To be honest, I'm a person who's afraid of trouble. My interests are fickle, and I never last long. I'm especially not suitable for a job like being a pillar that will overwork me. Russell shook his head. On the contrary, I prefer to leave after I've had my fun. I'm best at shifting the blame. I'll leave my mess to others to deal with and amuse myself by watching them complain. So, you're thinking too much. Woodman, even without me, the celestial genealogy can be reorganized in the hands of others, from people who are better than me. Besides, have you forgotten, he said, celestial genealogy also has things like living gods. Come on, Russell. Woodman shook his head disdainfully. If I were you, I wouldn't have too much expectation for a decoration that's better than nothing. No. Russell smiled meaningfully and raised 2 fingers as if celebrating a victory. I mean, now there are 2. You can talk whatever you want, Russell. Woodman was not moved. But don't think that I'll believe your nonsense. It's up to you to believe it or not, but it's up to me to say it or not. Russell spread his hands and smiled evilly. Besides, if I say so, a seed of doubt will be planted in your heart. Will you start to be paranoid? Will you feel afraid to shoot the rat for fear of breaking the vases? Will you unconsciously be afraid? That's my goal, Woodman. I can say that what I just said is a lie, but will you really believe it? Do you really think that I don't have the Book of Destiny? Do you really think that what I told you is the whole truth? Or do you think that this is all I've prepared for you? Think, Woodman. You have to think, constantly think. Russell grinned and whispered evilly, but you have to remember, once you think, I'll laugh. Woodman did not say anything. His face only became more and more unpleasant. Russell, on the other hand, sniffed the scent of anger and felt refreshed, planting the seed of doubt, sprinkling the rain of lies, growing the fruit of hesitation and uneasiness, and finally reaping the end of destruction. Was there anything more pleasant than this? Don't forget, Russell, you're not the only one who's good at this. Woodman was indifferent. For a poisonous stream, like me, there are no boundaries. You can't kill me. I'm everywhere. I'll find the best viewing angle to admire your every move. For example, your favorite student, how about that? He paused and looked meaningfully at Great Si Ming, who was on the snowy plain in the distance. From today onwards, we'll be together forever. Himself, his loved ones, the people around him, and even his student. No one is perfect, Russell. As long as you find the right breakthrough point, anyone will feel the call of hell. The phantom from hell raised his hand and pointed at his head. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of brilliance such a soul will shine when it falls into the abyss. No, you won't. Russell shook his head and sighed softly. It was as if he was watching a stubborn child touch the electric switch. He was worried and helpless as he advised, if I were you, I'd stay as far away from him as possible. Soon, you won't want to appear in front of him anymore, he said, because he'll leave an indelible shadow in your heart. He'll make you feel pain. Russell warned solemnly, pain like never before. I'll wait and see, Woodman teased. Woodman replied jokingly. His eyes were brimming with an evil light from hell. He laughed. Our second game has begun, Russell. No. Russell shook his head and leaned back on the chair. He crossed his arms and was ready to watch the show. I think it's already over. At that moment, Woodman's smile froze on his face. In the snowstorm that filled the sky, in front of the gates of hell, the young man opposite Woodman smiled. So sunny, so gentle that it was enough to dispel the eternal frost and snow. In his right hand, as if by magic, a strange crystal appeared. It looked like a fragment of a mirror. It was sparkling and translucent, and it refracted a dazzling light. However, such a bright light made Woodman's expression twitch. He could not hide his shock and fear. His eyes turned scarlet in an instant, and his expression was ferocious. He was swallowed by the coldness that he had long forgotten. He was about to scream. He wanted to withdraw his projection, but the meme that had quietly seeped into Weisher's soul could not be removed. There were too many entanglements, too many memories. When he looked at Weisher, Weisher was also looking at him. After this poisonous stream that existed in the concept penetrated deep into Weisher's bone marrow, his existence was also tightly grasped by Weisher's hand. He was not allowed to escape at this moment. It was as if a warm host was asking a guest to stay. He was reluctant to part. It was the new year, and he was already here. Woodman, you have to understand. I'm not here for Lu Baiyin, but for you. Weisher's words were soft, but it made Woodman begin to tremble. In Weisher's hand, the fire of alchemy was reignited. The crystal-clear fragment quickly shrank under the forging. In the end, it turned into an exquisite crystal bullet and filled the magazine of the Lord of the Flies. The magazine was closed, and the sound was crisp. Weisher said, because I also have a gift for you. Its name is retribution. This is your retribution. Just like that, he solemnly raised the pistol. His left hand held the wrist of his right hand, and he closed one eye. Just like a beginner, he aimed at the constantly flashing illusions. Aim at his face. Pull the trigger. Just like that, he conveyed this greeting from the deepest part of hell. Tell him, Mr. Vitali sends his greetings. In that instant, the flames flashed and disappeared. The loud noise tore apart the silence of the snowfield. Countless snowflakes flew up in the roar and rustled down under the cold night sky. In front of countless screens, countless people stood up in shock and stared with their eyes wide open. Behind the gates of hell, Woodman tilted his head in a daze. A large hole slowly appeared between the man's eyebrows. It was hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman. The illusory figure was actually hit by this spear. Her delicate facial features twitched. There was the sound of cracking. The phantom flickered and spasmed. Countless cracks appeared on Woodman's body. What followed was a wail of agony that seemed to fill the entire world. Ah! In hell, at the border, in the present, at this moment, in almost every corner of the world, countless people heard a distant and despairing wail. Under the sun, under the moonlight, on the wasteland, in the city, in front of cows and horses, on the television screens, and even more so in the eyes of many people who had been parasitized, a figure suddenly staggered and rolled in pain appeared. Some were old, some were young, some were male, and some were female. Everyone's eyes were different, but everyone could conclude that it was a black-haired, black-eyed Roman. Moreover, his expression seemed to be filled with indescribable despair and pain. And in the deepest part of the land of dreams, in a stone coffin covered in layers of arrays, a body connected to countless cables began to spasm violently. He opened his empty eyes. He roared without restraint. Viscous wisps of blood surged out from his mouth and nose. They came to life and swam like snakes in the antiseptic liquid. The surging origin substance leaked out, turning the entire place where the stone coffin was stored into a distorted demonic realm. This was the ravage from the path of transformation. It used good and evil as a spear, despair and happiness as a poison, and targeted human nature and human knowledge itself as a curse and punishment, a curse from the god of evil. The moment it came into contact, it quickly spread through the phantom and spread to every host's body, absorbing the origin substance of the host and interfering with Woodman in reverse. In an instant, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions, when countless tiny pains overlapped, they would turn into a torrent of despair that would cause people to collapse. In the end, in front of Weischer, the screaming phantom suddenly stiffened. From the bullet hole in his forehead, the cracks had completely spread to his entire body. The ear-piercing sound of glass shattering rang out. It welcomed the collapse. What lit up under the cracks was the cold light reflected by countless mirrors. Every broken mirror reflected a projection of Woodman. And when the countless mirrors gathered together, the light intertwined, faintly reflecting a withered figure. His hair was white, and his killing intent was fierce. He was old and cold. Apart from the frightening darkness in his pitch-black eyes, there was nothing else. It was different from the gentleness and kindness that was left for the younger generation. This was one of the true essences of the path of transformation, the true gathering of all the evil in human nature. Black God Vitali, it seems that someone has come to pick you up. Weischer smiled and waved goodbye. Have a safe trip. I wish you... Oh, have a good time? Weischer... The youth's roar was ear-piercing. He recklessly charged out of hell and reached out to grab Weischer's face. But then his movements quickly froze, just a hair's breadth away. Frozen. Weischer's smile didn't change. He raised his right hand and pointed it at the savage face. he raised his middle finger. Goodbye. Instantly, countless mirrors appeared in the air, reflecting Woodman's appearance. They overlapped and shrank, quickly collapsing into a small dot. Finally, they fell into the black god's hands. He clenched them tightly. Without saying anything else, the incomplete black god took a deep look at him, turned around, and disappeared into the mirror world. Soon, the strange giant mirror expanded again. After swallowing Hell's Gate, it turned into an illusory light and dissipated. Only the whistling of the wind was left on the snowfield. In the long and drawn-out silence, the whole world stared dumbfounded at the sudden change that happened in an instant. They couldn't believe what they saw. Woodman was dead. Was it over? Or was this another illusion of the Golden Dawn? Was it one of the opponent's schemes? Or was this actually real? In the present realm, the border, and infernal realm, the remnants of the Republic, the Directorate of Governance, the Continuation Academy, and even the 5 major lineages, as well as the Golden Dawn and Infernal Realm, as well as countless spies, were all stunned in place. They couldn't understand. Their minds were blank. All they felt was the shock and astonishment from the depths of their souls. Huaishur stood in the flying snow and silently looked at the night sky, the countless shining stars, and the brilliant aurora extending from the horizon. It was as if he could glimpse the glory of the past. He was focused and calm. He smiled silently. Tomorrow will be a good day. He sighed in anticipation and turned to leave. Only countless silent spies were left to witness the outcome after the dust settled. This was a victory that belonged to celestial genealogy, a victory that belonged to him. Chapter 972. Before Huaishur's picnic and winter excursion ended, the Ivory Tower's announcement had been officially released. After the Tianwen conference verified this, and the exact information was released in the next day's news, it set off a new round of uproar. From Liu Bayan's death in Greenland, the result of the duel between Great Sea Ming and Golden Dawn, to the battle between the Ivory Tower and the Golden Dawn. And even the battle ended quickly. The Abyss Raiders were wiped out at an incredible speed. After 40 years, the dragon summoning flute fired at full power once again, and the Land of Dreams was repelled. Then, the Heretic King was severely injured. Every piece of news was like a bomb, and in just a few minutes, it became the trending topic of the next day's news. When the news of Viral Woodman being completely eradicated came out, the first thing that triggered was not shock and astonishment. Instead, it was absurd. Are you King kidding me? It's not even the new year yet. Why is it April Fool's Day already? Is the celestial genealogy crazy to win? But when the data and analysis sent by the Bronze I provided further evidence and even irrefutable results, everyone fell into silence. Only in the headlines of the entire territory, the price and net sales of this information began to soar and increase at an incredible speed. And the S-rank details, and the whole story generated billions of sales for the Border Darknet in just a short 10 minutes. Not bad. KP danced excitedly. Huaishur, this guy is really not bad. If this happens a few more times, our sales for next year will reach the target in advance. I knew it. This guy knows how to work. Hey, Lily, quickly pick up a few more clips and record them. Let's strike while the iron is hot and raise another wave of money. Next year's. Lily? Lily, are you listening? Beside him, countless records surged out from between the pages and slowly intertwined, surrounding the silent girl. As if in a daze, she stared blankly at the back in the mirror. After a long time, she did not speak until KP raised his voice. She nodded as if she had just woken up from a dream. Oh, I know. She began to bury herself in work, but occasionally she could not help but raise her eyes and look at the phone beside her. When she saw the dim screen, she looked away in disappointment. "You haven't replied yet." KP sighed. "If you're concerned, why don't you just call them directly?" "I won't." Lily raised her head and glared at him. Anger. The corner of KP's eyes twitched. He felt as if he had struck a lightning bolt on Weischer's behalf. He suddenly felt even sadder. "Young lady, if you had such a temper when facing that guy, anything good would have happened long ago." He shook his head and whispered, "Are you angry?" "No." Lily answered in a muffled voice without raising her head. KP pinched his chin and looked at him carefully. "Are you angry?" "No." Lily raised her voice. "Live? No." The girl who was immersed in her work raised her head and looked at him expressionlessly. Her cold gaze made KP feel a chill. "Why are you throwing a tantrum at me, young lady?" KP shrunk his head, shook his head, and sighed. "Scumbags are really harmful. It's better to run a team, no matter what kind of unruly person you are. The host's sanctions will never abandon you." No one responded. Only a clear voice came from behind, which seemed to be a response. When KP turned around, he saw ST's indifferent expression and the 6th-level machine gun in her hand that began to rotate slowly. The burst of fire illuminated his horrified face. Then, there was no then. After emptying 3 boxes of bullets, ST kicked the rotten meat on the ground and the Gatling gun into the trash can. "That's F** king enough." ST withdrew her gaze and looked at her student with a gentle expression. She rubbed her hair. "Don't be sad. Maybe she's busy." Yes. KP poked his head out of the trash can and comforted her. "After all, there are quite a lot of people who want to call." Before his voice died away, a soft click was heard. ST pulled out the bolt of the grenade, threw the iron pomegranate inside, and closed the lid. After a muffled sound, the world became quiet, and Lily was already frozen in place. She was about to cry. "KP." ST gritted her teeth, rummaged through her pocket, and began to look for her cursed grenade RPG. But soon, a ding sound was heard. The phone screen lit up, illuminating Lily's surprised expression. "Sorry, my phone was broken. I borrowed a student's phone to see the message." "So, you were looking at it?" "I'm a bit embarrassed, but camping in Grand Hill is very interesting. The scenery is very good, but it's a bit cold." After that, he sent another photo. On the campfire, there was a big pot that was burnt black, and the charcoal inside, the surrounding girls' and boys' lifeless faces, and the hardtack in their hands. Caption: "Forgot to turn off the fire, accidentally cooked dinner. Super disgusting ORZ." Just like this, the girl repeatedly looked at the message and picture. She held her chin and couldn't help but laugh. In the trash can, KP poked his head out with the lid. He wanted to say something, but under ST and DM's indifferent gaze, he chose to shut up. He could only sigh silently. He felt that his girl was hopeless. He could only give it to her, for free. At the crucial moment, it seemed that he still had to rely on himself. In order to save his child's feelings, KP stood up bravely, and then decided to start a pink group. First, he found a few white mice to do an experiment. 10 minutes later, the new module was uploaded on the dark web. KP's recommendation: Peach Temptation, a room you can leave when your SAN value reaches 0. As the last cluster bomb fell from the sky, the roar in the distance once again reached the temporary command post. There was a faint smell of something burning in the scorching air, but in fact, it was just an illusion. It was too far away, and other than the loud sound of destruction, nothing else could be transmitted, including the wails of souls being destroyed. From a distance, one could only see the towering dark green monster raging in the fire. In the end, unable to resist the endless fire, it quickly collapsed, rotted, and even its bones were burned into nothingness. The city was shrouded in thick smoke and flames, but even the flames were imprisoned in an invisible cage. When the Yellow Pages were issued, what was created was this hell on earth where not even a blade of grass would grow in 100 years. Half an hour later, the border forever disappeared from the list of the entire territory, along with hundreds of ascendants infected by the solidification and 120,000 believers, and a crown wearer who had yet to be born. The operation in the Directorate of Governance was complete, and the Continuation Academy entered. The former Dark Legion has suffered 16 casualties, with a total of 1,400 innocents killed. The execution of the Yellow Pages against the Order of the Ashes has been completed. 10 minutes later, AI Ching concluded the final briefing and statement with the usual report, closing the document in her hand and silently waiting for a response. In the silence, everyone nodded without a word. At the head of the table, Jaeger lowered his head and stamped his seal on the report, carrying out the final filing. None of them offered any congratulations or words of praise, with the participants hurrying back to their posts after a simple greeting. Everyone's face was pale, as if they had died from overwork. Only Jaeger deliberately slowed down after handing the report to his assistant, looking towards the pantry outside the door. It seems that my eyes were right. You really are suited to work in the elevated floors. Your superior, Madame X, has expressed her admiration for you many times. He said, "It seems that in a few years I should call you a mess. Homophonic jokes aren't funny at all. In Doomsday, comedians would have their wages deducted if they told such jokes." AI Ching asked without looking back. "Coffee? Tea?" Jaeger shook his head and sighed. "Forget it. The doctor told me to stay away from caffeine. My brain has a problem." "Didn't the Continuation Academy provide you with a solution? It's just a minor surgery." "Forget it. Let a needle stick in my brain." Jaeger shook his head. "I don't like it there. Sometimes just thinking about it gives me nightmares." "What is it?" AI Ching asked bluntly. "A guy like you who only thinks about work wouldn't waste time chatting with me, would you? Or are you here to talk about makeup tips to hide your dark circles? Is it that obvious?" Taken aback, Jaeger picked up his glass to look at his reflection, and only breathed a sigh of relief when he found nothing. "Don't say such terrible things to an old person. My heart can't take it." This old man, who had already grasped the greatest power in the world to some extent, sighed. "I originally thought of a perfect topic to use to get to the point. Celestial genealogy?" AI Ching asked. Jaeger nodded. "What does it have to do with me?" AI Ching said, "That's something you should worry about. You should know that I have never been associated with the Utopia." "You know what I'm talking about." AI. Jaeger was helpless. "Don't make me feel awkward." "No, Jaeger, the awkwardness is mutual." AI Ching replied coldly, "Because your words make me feel awkward." "Well, let me put it bluntly. The main problem is that our special military officer hasn't been to London even once. There is a small disagreement in the decision-making room about the evaluation this time." He said, "I hope to consult your opinion." In fact, there was no problem. The only problem was that Weisher solved it too beautifully. He was so beautiful that it made people feel like they were in their first love. The sweetness and sourness pervaded their hearts, making it difficult for them to part with him. But when the old men in the decision-making room remembered that this beautiful boy was part of their family and had lived next to them since he was a child, he was even better than a childhood sweetheart. The boy that they had raised with great difficulty ran away with a broken-down blonde named Russell when the organization was sending him to college. This was very unbearable. Chapter 9, 73. In this regard, the decision-making room was divided into several factions of opinions. Some people said that the transfer of personnel still had to be based on Huaishi's own wishes. A forcibly picked melon would not be sweet. Some people felt that feelings were formed by getting along with each other, so they could go through the formalities first and take their time. Some people felt that it was already too late. After all, he and Russell were in love, and they might even have a child soon. How could they break up a warm family of celestial genealogy? And some people felt that wasn't that good. More people didn't express their opinions. But it was undeniable that after so many years, the Command Bureau once again felt the pain of losing talent from Huaishi. They recalled the shadow of the utopia and the helplessness of being a younger brother. Why didn't I think straight and throw him into that corner of the ivory tower to further his studies? Wouldn't it be less troublesome if he changed places? At the end of the day, it was because that bastard Russell was too ruthless. He even tried to poach people from the Command Bureau. It was really inhumane. And just when they were at their wits' end, everyone's eyes fell on the person who introduced Huaishi to the Astronomy Society, AI La Meng. They hoped that she could think of a way. She could drive Fat Tiger away and win back Huai Jingxiang's favor. AI Ching sipped her coffee expressionlessly and answered in a businesslike manner. The military officer system is directly under the decision-making room and has nothing to do with the overhead floor. I don't think I have anything to say about this matter. Jaeger was stunned and immediately became confused. I thought you guys. He raised his hands and made a gesture of clasping his fingers. Then, under AI Ching's increasingly cold gaze, he didn't say the second half of the sentence. He could only pick up his cup of water. He felt the complexity of the feelings between young people nowadays. Where he wants to go is his own business. I don't think there's anything to consider about this matter. Just ask him directly. AI Ching coldly put down her coffee cup. But with all due respect, before that, please buy the highest level of personal insurance from the Continuation Institute. Not everyone is as lucky as Renee. As she spoke, she picked up the cylindrical pen that was clipped to the folder, clicked it twice, and put it in her pocket. Her crisp voice was so pleasing to the ears. This made Jaeger feel helpless. Indeed, such a pure person. No wonder he was chosen and loved by celestial genealogy. He pinched the bridge of his nose. It seems that many people are going to be disappointed. The second half of the sentence is correct, but the first half is a bit problematic. AI Ching corrected him in the end. Jaeger, it wasn't celestial genealogy that chose him. He chose celestial genealogy. Just like that, she turned and left, disappearing at the end of the corridor. I've had enough. Why is the internship just sitting in the office doing exercises? When the email that represented a new job rang, Fu Yi raised her head in despair. What about beach holidays, bonfire parties, and barbecue? Those are all words used to deceive newcomers. The sea and beach of the Continuation Institute are all test areas for the creator. You don't want to wear a swimsuit and sing in the sun and suddenly be caught by a sea monster, do you? Next to her was her temporary partner and roommate, Gemma, a blonde girl from the Ivy League of America. It was said that the noble blood of the gods flowed in her body, but even she didn't care much about it. The blood was so thin that even if she worked hard to get a cerebral hemorrhage, it could only make her hair glow at night. At this moment, she didn't look like the rumored noble lady at all. She squatted on the office chair, turned around, and urged Fu Yi, "Hurry up and give me the analysis report of the Australian region's perceptual stratum. I need to use it here. The men in front are waiting for the data." I'm doing it. Fu Yi sighed and clicked the right mouse button to create a new document. Once again, she buried her head in the vast sea of data of the Silver Sea, dazzling her eyes. When she finally looked up It was already 4 hours later. Fu Yi picked up the mirror in her bag and looked at herself, desperately covering the dark circles under her eyes that couldn't be covered by foundation. So, the internship at the Continuation Institute means to work as a human? She slumped weakly on the chair. Forget about the holiday beach. Why isn't there even a practical exercise? Practical exercise? You're really a newcomer. Gemma turned back and took 2 deep puffs of the electronic cigarette in her mouth. First time? Yes. Fu Yi sighed. Wow, you're so fast. I thought you were my predecessor. I really didn't expect it. Gemma scratched her head. It's already a lottery to be assigned to the analysis team of the Central Control Room to process documents on your first internship. Who knows how many people are lining up to apply? You're not even qualified to serve tea and water. I came for the sake of being able to observe the Silver Sea up close. Fu Yi sprawled on the chair, feeling hopeless. Then you're going to have a hard time, Gemma said sympathetically. According to the rules, newcomers like us still have 2 years of internship, 1 year of observation and training, and 5 years of assistant work after graduation. The fastest record is 6 years. And then you can welcome 30 years of hellish overtime, without holidays. Gemma added a stab to Fu Yi's hopes. It's said that after the age of 60, you can temporarily lift the confidentiality level and move freely in the priority area. If you ask me, why don't you transfer to an analyst with me while you're still young? At least you'll have normal holidays and shifts. Stop talking. I want to go home. Fu Yi's voice was weak. Why do I have to be a social animal in the Continuation Institute? My dad is counting on me to retire. Don't worry. At least the Continuation Institute's nursing home in Shambhala is well equipped, and employees' families can get discounts. Gemma looked at her sympathetically, as if thinking of something, and glanced left and right. It was the night shift, so there was no one in the office. She came in and looked around sneakily. Then she took something out of her pocket and said in a low voice, "Let me show you something good. This is something hard to get. My uncle, who works in the bureau, gave it to me. It's definitely food for thought during the long hours of overtime." Looking at her strange and mysterious face, it would not be surprising if she took out a pack of white powder in the next moment. But then she found that she took out a phone. She clicked on the video. Then a familiar face appeared. The handsome face was stained with blood, and he looked up expressionlessly, as if he could see a mirror in the distant sky. Fu Yi sucked in a breath of cold air and almost jumped out of her chair in fright. What is this? What else could it be? Don't tell me you don't know this? Gemma looked at her in disbelief, as if she was looking at a country bumpkin. The latest confidential video of Paradise Prince in 8K HD. I used the dormitory's Wi-Fi for several hours before I downloaded it. Tomorrow's news can sell you $60,000 per minute. Is this very popular? Of course. I even sent him rockets back then. Gemma was instantly enraptured. Look, this side profile. I'm already healed. My mother's heart melted. Wait, no matter how you look at it, this is a crime scene, right? And you're only 1 year older than him, okay? The corners of Fu Yi's eyes twitched, and she found it hard to understand. But it looks like you've gained weight. You've been eating well recently. Gemma's eyes flashed, and she leaned forward, her expression saying, "Fu, are you also a member?" No, I'll skip it. His accessories are too expensive. I can't afford them. Fu Yi sweated. It just happened to have the same name as my dog. So I followed it. Right, why sure? The latter half of the sentence was said to the stupid dog that stuck its head out from under the table. The stupid dog grinned and drooled. Speaking of which, Gemma seemed to have thought of something and curiously looked at her roommate in front of her. Do you know each other? No. Huaishir is a very common name in Dongxia. If you shout it on the street, 7 or 8 people will turn around to look at you. Fu Yi coughed and began to talk calmly. Just like your John and Peter, it means to bless children to grow up safely and have many grandchildren. But people with this name are usually scumbags. Gemma, you must be careful. Is that so? Gemma was shocked for an entire year. Of course. Fu Yi struggled to maintain her composure and quickly changed the topic. But what is he doing? The war between celestial genealogy and Golden Dawn, the battle between 2 generations of great gods. Isn't it awesome? Gemma raised her phone to show off, but soon she became distressed. There must be a new card. What if my wallet is not enough? If only I can get a signed version, I can definitely use it for a long time. Appreciate it for a long time. This appreciation of yours, is it even proper? The corner of Fu Yi's mouth twitched. She was speechless. She felt that it was better to follow her instincts and not talk about this topic that could easily burn down her friend's house if she accidentally leaked something. But she could not help but look at the screen in Gemma's hand. After a long time, she shook her head, helplessly. But it's quite cool to look at it like this occasionally. She sighed softly and looked away. She thought for a while, then thought for a while, then thought for a while again. Just like this, after hesitating for a long time, she picked up her phone, opened her contact list, and typed a message. Good fight. The message was sent. She leaned back in her chair and yawned. She took the time to rest before the next batch of emails came. The long road of being a class monitor had just begun. But when he received a reply, ding, the corner of her mouth could not help but curl up slightly. India, Lanka City. The border formed after the fall of the 10-headed demon king was like a city suspended on a cliff. Looking down, one could vaguely see the wreckage of the 3 cities of gold, silver, and black iron that had been destroyed by the arrow of the god of destruction. Those magnificent buildings were full of cracks and floated above hell, proving the glory of this place in the past. And right at the highest point of this city, on the square of the solemn temple, there was silence at this moment. The Brahmin priests who were kneeling on both sides widened their eyes in shock, staring at the slender figure of the challenger. Crack! There was a soft sound of something breaking. A crack appeared on the glazed tiles. But to the people present, it was no different from a thunderbolt. For the past 50 years, someone had broken the thin tiles in the hands of the axe-wielding Rama again. There was actually someone in this world who could shake the majesty of the god of all martial arts. Even the silhouette sitting on the high platform raised his eyebrows in astonishment, and Luo Xian took a step back. She was sweating profusely and panting heavily. She could barely stand. When the projection of the axe-wielding Rama's majesty dissipated, on the high platform, the middle-aged woman with long hair and face painted with gold and gems appeared. Looking down at the challenger like this, she was not angry. Instead, she laughed joyfully. Not bad. Luo Xian, you are not bad. She extended her hand to invite the junior in front of her. Why don't you abandon that good-for-nothing Luo Siwei and become my daughter? Luo Xian shook her head and smiled. Do you want to be loved by someone like me? Now, the crowned person who maintained the genealogy of India, the current generation's axe-wielding Rama, Sonam Balan, shook her head disapprovingly. Is the love of the abyss and the love of the world different? In my opinion, what you are constrained by is not worth mentioning. This is India, Luo Xian. Even the Azura king can move the heavens with his asceticism. If there is a difference between the abyss and the present, I am afraid you will not be able to walk out of the contradiction in your life. If I don't care, won't others care? Luo Xian replied calmly. At best, you are just deceiving yourself and others. If you can't even understand your own nature, how can you understand others? If that is the case, I will take it that you have declined. Sonam shook her head slightly. Although you don't know what is good for you, everyone has their own aspirations. You have your own choice. I will not force you. According to our bet, Luo Xian, you have broken the tile in my hand and won this round. You can take the map to Sanlian City and the relics your mother left behind before she solidified. But you have to understand that even if you find her, you may not be able to get the answer you want. I just want to find her. Luo Xian asked, do I need a reason to see my mother? Indeed, but the result may not be good. Sonam stared at the junior in front of her with pity. After a long time, she sighed softly and turned to leave. In the temple that returned to silence, Luo Xian raised her head and stared at the gray sky. After a long time, she smiled silently. In the evening, Luo Xian walked out of the temple with a bag on her back and a white horse on her back. She walked towards the entrance of hell. But before she passed through the door, she felt a vibration in her arms. A message from afar popped up on the dim screen. She was stunned for a moment. Immediately, her smile became gratified and joyful. Aren't you pretty good? Why, sure. Do your best, do your best. Just like that, she looked back expectantly and took one last look at the human world. She would never look back again. In the early morning, the basement was opened. Tangi stepped on the cold floor barefoot. She couldn't help but yawn and sleepily walked to the kitchen. Ah, so sleepy. She stopped in her tracks and looked out the window in confusion. Why is it so bumpy outside? Old Fong, what happened? Was there a forced demolition near our house? Miss Tangi, you finally... Outside the window, Fong Shu, who was busy in the garden, looked up in surprise. Then he was dumbfounded. The bucket slipped out of his hand and fell to the ground. Bang! Chapter 974. Hell, the quiet zone, the land of dreams. In the stone room that had returned to silence, a few dark figures quietly looked down at the broken sarcophagus and the incomplete body inside. It had lost all its water and turned into a crooked and shriveled corpse. Most of it had already collapsed into dust. Only the inside of the cracked skull. In the darkness, there was still a faint flash of light. Accompanied by the sound of the door opening, Mathers, who was supporting himself with his cane, slowly walked in. His footsteps were a little staggered, and the huge crack in his chest had not been completely repaired. Seeing Woodman's corpse, he paused for a moment. Is he really dead? After being attacked by Vitali, even if he isn't dead, he should be crippled, right? Yiji shrugged. Even if he can still survive with his remaining strength, he shouldn't think about stirring up trouble everywhere. Fortunately, I ran far away. Otherwise, if I was caught by the old man, I'm afraid I would have to accompany Woodman. Do you want to search for traces of the day-night mirror? Mathers asked, after leaving the Russian Federation's genealogy, I don't know where Russell will hide it. It might not be easy to find. His backup is still there. Vitali can't kill him, so he can only imprison him. Among the dark figures, a low voice suddenly sounded. It was the sound of the land of dreams. Let him be quiet for a while first, so that he won't run around every day. It's so annoying, and it's so annoying to see him. The voice said, next is the War of the Worlds. I will find an opportunity to destroy the day-night mirror. Mathers shrugged helplessly. Now that things had come to this was the only way. No one had ever thought that someone would be able to secretly awaken the day-night mirror that had been silent for so many years. They also didn't expect that Woodman, who was originally the strangest among them, would fail twice in a row in a ditch called Huaishur. The first time was fine, but the second time, he was gone. Now, as a mimetic virus, Woodman could freely travel between the modern realm, the border, and hell. Relying on the memes left behind in many people and ancient books, he could be said to be everywhere. Even if he killed all the people who had been implanted with his memes, as long as he spread some ancient books, he could spread again. It could be said that he had no weaknesses. Now, all the memes were still there, but the server that represented Woodman's consciousness was being pushed away by a guy who repaired the air conditioner at the door. By the time they realized what had happened, the server had already been moved back home by an old man who collected junk to play with his grandson. It was too late to catch up. This was the most dismal thing in the world. At the end of the day, who could have imagined that the disheartened Russell in the past would suddenly become so fierce after being injected with chicken blood? It was as if one day, the daughter of the god of war, who had been sold into a brothel, had suddenly punched the 100,000 soldiers who had come to help her improve her performance. Sorry, I was faking it. I have been waiting for this day for 70 years. In the blink of an eye, the old hen turned into a duck. Even the version was different. Who could they find to reason with? Now, no one would regard Russell as a clown who overestimated himself, just like how no one would treat the disaster sword as a gigolo who sold his face. The reconstruction of the celestial genealogy was almost a foregone conclusion. To the Golden Dawn, this was no longer a disease of the scabies, but an out-and-out mortal danger. As the remnants of the utopia, the fate between them had already been decided. They would fight to the death. It could be foreseen that in the coming War of the Worlds, there would be many times when the two sides would wrestle. Everyone had to be on guard. Mathers pondered for a moment and asked again, Woodman is gone. What about the part of the plan he was in charge of? Leave it to Edward Witt. The voice said, when necessary, how about Bennett assist from the side? The evil enlightened one with the prayer beads in his hand nodded slowly and had no objections. This is the first time I've done the work of a messenger. The solidified one named Edward sighed softly and put on his cloak. I'll do my best, but it's best not to expect a temporary worker to do excellent work. Just do your best, the voice said. But with every bit of hard work, there will be results. I'll do my best. Edward's expression became more and more helpless. Although he was unwilling, he did not say anything more and turned to leave. Where's the heretic king? Bennett asked, how are his injuries? He's recuperating in the sweet dew pool. His foundation has been damaged, but there aren't any serious consequences. The voice said, he's just resting for a while. Time is of the essence. During this period of time, I need everyone to be conscientious in their duties. Double the hardship, double the hard work. Quoting Shakespeare's lines, Mathers sighed softly. Who would have thought that we'd have to work overtime in hell? The impromptu meeting came to an end. When those figures gradually left, Mathers remained where he was, holding his cane. In the long silence, he did not speak. He quietly looked at the tragic appearance of his companion. With a wave of his hand, he sealed his body in the sarcophagus again, waiting for the future. Witt, are you still there? He suddenly asked. I'm here. The voice of the land of dreams came again. The ruler, who had long become one with this moving reality, spoke again. His voice was eternally calm. What's the matter? The last message that Woodman sent back, was it true? Mathers asked seriously, is the Book of Destiny really not in the ivory tower? No, that was Russell's lie. Witt replied. After receiving the news, I've already activated the Dead Sea Scroll once more and obtained an accurate result. The Book of Destiny is indeed in the ivory tower. There's no mistake about it. Woodman was deceived. That was a trap that Russell had carefully prepared for us. I even suspect that Russell might have already obtained the Book of Destiny's approval. Mathers' expression suddenly changed. How likely is that? more than 80%. Witt said decisively. The remaining 20% is due to the limitations of our current information. We cannot rule out other reasons. But no matter what, the Book of Destiny is in his control. Mathers was even more confused. He asked, but why did he lie? Because he likes it. Witt said, how do you know what he's thinking? For an opponent like Russell, no matter what he says or does, it might be an illusion or a lie. He can even hide his true advancement. So it's meaningless to trace the reason. You just need to do what you should do. No matter what he says, it won't change our plan. Witt said, this is the best way to deal with him. But since he has the Book of Destiny, Mather's expression gradually turned gloomy. He could no longer avoid this possibility. Putting aside the enormous authority that the Book of Destiny had over the revision of events, what was even more frightening was that the Utopia's inheritance had over 400% of the revision value. That was the great result of saving the world from hell 4 times. Today, although the Utopia no longer existed, the countless results it left behind were still constantly creating more and more changes. The revision value was probably still rising. If Russell could really rebuild the celestial genealogy, or even complete the rebuilding of the Utopia, then the power he would obtain would be even more terrifying. When that time comes, people like us will probably be nothing to him, right? Mathers said coldly. So what? Witt asked in return, are we going to lose our composure because of this? Or should we pay a huge price to annihilate him before he succeeds? The existence of the Utopia is just our past. It's not worth mentioning, and it can't change what will happen in the future. Witt said coldly, Mathers, everyone in the outside world thinks that the 3 of us created the Golden Dawn, but you should know very well who really created the Golden Dawn. Our existence is the choice of this world. Russell can't stop that outcome from happening. Mathers's hand trembled slightly as he gripped his cane tightly. Witt, Mathers, and Woodman. It was true that the 3 of them were important organizers and leaders of the Golden Dawn, and they all played an irreplaceable role. However, in the past 70 years, no matter who it was, no one would have thought who was the culprit behind the destruction of the Utopia and the true instigator of this evil outcome. Perhaps Russell had guessed a little, but Russell would never announce it to the public. No one would believe that the appearance of the Golden Dawn came from the Utopia. No, from the will of the Astronomy Association. It came from the person who really led them on this path. After helping and pushing, covering up all traces, he sat back and watched the evil outcome be irreversible, the president of the previous generation's Astronomy Association. Wake up, Alistair, Mathers, Witt said indifferently. After being silent for so long, it's time for us to do something. It's time for the present realm to witness our masterpiece, Westcott said indifferently. After a short silence, Mathers nodded silently. A deep sound came from the depths of the land of dreams. The bell rang. Pairs of pale eyes looked up. The expression of hell appeared. When they went there, they used the Rainbow Bridge as a transit station. When they returned, they did not have that kind of convenience. They had to rely on transportation. Fortunately, there was still Raymond's helicopter. Otherwise, Weischer would probably have to take the students on a sled. It took them 4 hours to go to Iceland, transit at the border, and then take a flight and a train. It took them more than half a day to finally return to the Ivory Tower. What they saw was a scene of devastation. After the disaster, almost all the buildings in the Ivory Tower had been damaged to varying degrees, other than the students of the School of Architecture, who could not stop laughing. Everyone else was cursing. After calculating the damage and repair costs, the vice president's expression was frighteningly ugly. It would take at least half a month to restore it to its original state, and dealing with the aftermath would be even more troublesome. The most important thing was that Bennett actually ran away. It was simply a great humiliation. The most bleak thing was that he had no choice. A tall tree attracts the wind. As one of the signboards of the ivory tower, he was the best fighter on the surface, even better than Russell. Moreover, he was a time stigmata like Kronos, who once had the identity of a Doomsday Sentinel. Whoever wanted to deal with the ivory tower, he would definitely be the first target to be dealt with. Russell's priority was not as high as his. Otherwise, once he loaded, everything would be over. At least 50% of the resources consumed in the Golden Dawn raid were spent on him, and the other 50% was blown up together with the old campus by Russell. It could only be said that the character was too strong and was unanimously targeted by other players. There was no gaming experience at all. Even so, after seeing Why Sure, he still forced a smile. It looked more and more frightening. Go and rest first. We'll talk about other things tomorrow at the celebration banquet. After asking a few questions, Isaac nodded, showing a rare, satisfied expression, and comforted him. Your house is fine. Mr. Krishna hid your house in Bhagavang immediately. That's good. Huaishur also breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had contacted Feng Shu immediately after changing his phone to ensure that everything was fine, the old man's vague manner made Huaishur feel a little uneasy. If he had known that Russell would play so big, he would not have moved the Chalcedony Hall back to the ivory tower before leaving, so that the old man would not be worried with him. Even if Feng Shu was fine, what would he do if his game collection and console were damaged by Golden Dawn? After learning that the dormitory area was still being inspected and repaired, Huaishur simply took the students home. You guys can stay here for the next few days. Let Anya try Feng Shu's cooking. He walked in front with big and small bags, pushed open the gate of the courtyard, and passed through the courtyard and flower bed that Feng Shu had carefully maintained. He threw the bags at the door, looked at the familiar scene, and felt a sense of relief as if he had returned home. The forest house behind was even more familiar, and he poked his head into the kitchen. Feng Shu, I'm back. Is there anything to eat? I'll get it myself. Teacher's house is decorated quite well. Anna looked around curiously. I thought it was the kind of house that eats instant noodles in the single dormitory. She paused, and her smile became curious and strange. Is it a woman? Anya, don't be impudent. Yuan knocked on her head. Teacher is still single. The girl was speechless. That sounds even worse. Huaishur ruffled her hair, too lazy to talk nonsense with her. After hanging his coat on the hanger, he went to the living room and just wanted to lie on the sofa and have a good sleep under the sun. But just in front of the living room, he saw the old man winking at him with a complicated and anxious expression, as if he saw the backyard on fire but couldn't speak. He had never seen him so anxious. Are you okay, Feng Shu? Are you not feeling well? Huaishur was stunned and immediately quickened his pace. But before he took a few steps, he heard the familiar melody of a game from the TV in the living room, as if someone had started Huaishur's console and played games when he wasn't there. But Feng Shu never touched that kind of thing, and usually watched the documentary channel and the Almighty Renovation King. Or could it be that some bastard touched his save file when he wasn't there? Huaishur suddenly became angry, rolled up his sleeves, and rushed into the living room. Then he froze in place, petrified. The afternoon sun came in through the window, reflecting the golden afterglow of the dark hair. On the sofa, the little girl holding the controller was staring at the TV screen with rapt attention. She seemed to be only 11 or 12 years old. The black dress was delicate and lovely. Two slender and long legs stretched out from under the skirt, resting on the coffee table, accompanied by a happy humming. Her toes were flexible and slightly bouncing. Hearing Huaishur's voice, she pressed the pause button and slowly turned around. Huaishur almost cried out involuntarily. That young and beautiful face seemed to carry an eternal smile and mysterious charm, causing others to be intoxicated. One could not see the solemnity and grace of the past. What was revealed at this moment was the cuteness and mischievousness of a girl. Her bright eyes blinked, looking at Huaishi's dull face. As if she knew what he was thinking, her smile was proud and happy. Huaishi almost forgot to breathe. He wasn't captured by this smile that couldn't be compared with all the treasures in the world, but felt an unprecedented chill and the crisis of death. Wait, no. Huaishi turned pale with fright and opened his hands to stop her. But it was too late, because a voice full of surprise had already sounded. Full of joy and innocence, the girl in the black dress smiled and opened her mouth to call, "Dad, you're back." Chapter 9, 75. Cairo. The hot wind blew against his face. In the open off-road vehicle, Russell raised his hand, pressed on his headscarf, and looked up at the flying yellow sand in the distance. The further away they were from the city, the sparser the greenery. In the end, except for the short bushes, there were only the buildings in the distance. In this ancient and closed country, everything seemed to have nothing to do with outsiders. The residents lived a peaceful life, day after day. Even if there were occasionally tourists from afar, they could only admire the beautiful scenery here and could not really enter their lives. No matter how warm their smiles were, there was always a cold barrier between them. Even those who occasionally went out to study or work rarely talked about their hometown life with others, although there was no difference between here and there. It was hard to tell whether it was coldness or arrogance, self-sufficient and self-sufficient. They had little contact with the outside world and did not care about what was happening outside. Under the rule of the pharaoh, this country had lasted for thousands of years and would continue to exist. Now, the mighty fleet of cars meandered along the road and drove into the city. After passing through layers of gates, in the end, only one car stopped in front of the last square. The black-robed old man, who had been waiting for a long time, looked unhappy. "You're a little late," he said. "You're almost over the time." "Something happened on the way. Sorry. I heard about the Golden Dawn incident. You did well, but it still can't be used as an excuse." The old man did not harp on the lateness. After waving his hand, he led the way in front and walked hurriedly. "You're never punctual. Even if you don't look at the occasion, you should look at the person, right? Russell, be serious. If you miss this village, you won't have this opportunity again. You have to cherish the opportunity." Russell was puzzled. "Why are you more anxious than me? Maybe it's because I'm not a stinky idiot who always puts on an appearance of not caring to deceive others, but actually cares to death. Hey, we haven't seen each other for decades. Can't you be a little friendlier?" "No, I'm not friendly." The old man looked back at him. "If it weren't for the urgency of time, I would have hit you. 30 years ago, I would have broken your dog neck." He could feel the anxiety and urgency in his old friend's expression. "Fine, it's my fault." Russell raised his hands in surrender. "In fact, I've tried my best to keep my promise, but those bastards from Golden Dawn keep messing with me. There are always accidents, my friend, but there are some things that shouldn't happen." The high priest of Thoth, the leader of the Egyptian genealogy, said, "You'd better hurry. Hurry up." "What happened?" "His Majesty is about to enter a deep sleep ahead of schedule. I don't know how long it will be before he wakes up again," said the high priest of Thoth. "This is all I can arrange for you." "Thank you." Russell expressed his gratitude with a solemn expression. "Before returning to Egypt, I was once a member of the Utopia. If you want to reorganize the celestial genealogy, I naturally won't sit idly by. But I'm afraid this is all I can do for you." The high priest hurriedly said, "Half an hour ago, His Majesty just issued an imperial order to close the borders of the country. From tomorrow onwards, if you come a day later, I'm afraid you won't be able to enter Egypt. In this battle of the worlds, Egypt will not participate in anything other than the necessary defense. So serious? Russell was stunned. What happened? I don't know, but His Majesty naturally has his reasons for doing so. The high priest paused for a moment, then turned around and reminded him, seriously, I know you like to joke, but here it's best to be respectful if you still want His Majesty to make a prophecy for you. I will. Luo Su nodded his head, no longer smiling. In front of the pitch-black door was the last palace of the noble emperor in this world, the tomb, the hall of afterlife after the pharaoh's death, or rather, the cage. Waiting for him inside was the 17th pharaoh, named Amenhotep. At the same time, among the human incarnations of the 9 pillar gods, he was also the most farsighted. His talent was prophecy, an established prophecy. It far surpassed all the pharaohs in the past. After combining many divinities, it could be said to be the power of absolute foresight. Whatever he said, it would definitely happen, and there would be no discount or reversal in it. There was no word game, nor any luck. An absolutely correct prophecy, an absolutely unchangeable prophecy. But the price was a distortion of divinity that far exceeded the previous pharaohs. He was a man of few words all his life, other than a few decrees. He had never said anything else. Even so, he was forced to live in the tomb in advance at the age of 34, relying on the secret ritual in the pyramid to suppress the boiling divine blood in his body. Amidst the solemn chanting and prayers, Russell took off his clothes, washed away the dust, and changed into a long robe. Step by step, he walked into the darkness. No one accompanied him. He stepped into the huge maze alone. The deeper he went, the greater the power he could feel. It was as if a ferocious trapped beast was panting in a cage, swallowing its own blood hoarsely. Enduring the pain, solemn praises and rich incense could not whitewash the essence that was gradually solidifying. In the end, Russell even began to wonder whether he was walking in the present world or in the palace of the ruler of hell. It was even more exaggerated than that. What he had to face was the eternal emperor of the human world, created by gathering the divine power of the 9 pillar gods, the pharaoh who had struggled in the quagmire of solidification and distortion for decades. This creepy, surging darkness was not a prop that he deliberately used to mock his guests. On the contrary, it was to protect his guests. And now, after passing through the deep passageway, he finally came to the hall that he could not see the end of and the shape of. Above the heavy darkness, the dim light illuminated the outline of the throne and the thin figure. His long hair was like flowing water, winding through the darkness, illuminated by the jumping lights, making it difficult to distinguish whether it was material or illusory. It was faintly transparent. His face was blurry, and no matter how intently he stared, he could only catch a glimpse of an unpredictable shadow. There were no ceremonial officers, no attendants, and no witnesses. The weak pharaoh and Russell faced each other from a distance. A hoarse murmur came from the high platform, like sleep talk, making it difficult to hear clearly. "Your Majesty." Russell put his hand on his chest and bowed. "There is no need to say anything unnecessary." The pharaoh's voice echoed in the heavy darkness, but it was impossible to tell whether it was old or young, thick or sharp, just like the sound of the darkness itself. The emperor on the throne panted, enduring the pain of distortion. "I already know the purpose of your visit. I will respond to your request. But, Russell, you have to understand, the prophecy is not without a price." He said, "The price of the prophecy is the prophecy itself." Under the long steps, Russell smiled and nodded. "I will gladly endure it." In the darkness, there was a long silence. There seemed to be a distant gaze looking down. It was so cold, so indifferent, overlooking all the changes in the human world. Seeing the future. At that moment, Russell heard a voice from the future. An hour later, the high priest waiting outside the mausoleum once again saw Russell walking out of the darkness. He smiled calmly. It was as if he had returned from an outing, relaxed and comfortable. The moment they passed each other, the two of them nodded to each other in a final greeting. They didn't say anything else. The two people who once belonged to the utopia said goodbye, knowing that this would be the last time they would meet. The high priest walked into the darkness again. Russell walked out of the palace. Behind him, the palace door closed for the first time. As he left, the ship of the dead turned into an illusion and disappeared into the eternal storm and fog. 2 hours later, Russell handed over his and Marcus passports to the checkpoint for inspection. After the stamp was stamped, the last car left the border of Egypt. The iron gates on both sides of the checkpoint slowly closed inwards. This ancient country closed its borders again. On both sides of the winding road, countless greenery gradually sprouted. The wind that blew against their faces seemed to have become gentle, blowing in the humidity from afar. Spring is coming. Russell raised his hand, put on his sunglasses, and turned on the radio. Amidst the rustling of the electric current, a song from a long time ago came over. It made one unable to help but hum softly. In the passenger seat, the sleeping Marcus woke up and quietly looked at the scenery outside the window. His mottled, white hair fluttered in the wind. Listening to his muffled singing, her cloudy eyes seemed to clear up. He had returned to the bright and beautiful times of his youth. "Russell, are you very happy?" he asked in confusion. "Yes." Russell nodded happily, looking at his beaming face. The old man asked curiously, "What happened to make you smile so contentedly?" "Nothing has happened yet, my friend." Russell thought for a moment and nodded. "I just remembered something happy. Is it about the future?" "Yes." "About us." "That's right." Russell replied with a smile. "It's about us, them, and everything in the future. Whether it's good or bad, it's worth looking forward to. As long as there's a future." He looked back one last time at the ancient country that was gradually disappearing on the horizon behind him. He retracted his gaze. Just like that, it gradually disappeared into the distance. Overjoyed, impatient, full of joy and anticipation, he welcomed the future that belonged to him. Russell, celestial genealogy, will eventually usher in rebirth. In the solemn and cold palace that was like a tomb, the pharaoh who had been imprisoned in the darkness woke up from a long dream and revealed a prophecy from the future. He said, "After you die, this was the best thing in the world. After I die, there will be no more floods." Chapter 976. Name. "Why, sure," the crisp voice answered, but it did not make the recorder behind the desk waver. As if he was used to this, Vice Principal Isaac did not even have the interest to adjust his glasses. He asked again without looking up, "Name?" "Next should be age." On the other side of the table, the little girl seemed to remind him helplessly. She sat on a chair that was too wide and large for her. Her long black hair flowed down her white shoulders like flowing water. It meandered down her dress and almost fell to the ground. Under the afternoon sun, the strands of long hair reflected a golden light, dazzling the eyes of those who saw it. "Name?" Isaac asked again. "I haven't thought about it yet. Let me think." She held her chin and thought hard for a moment. Suddenly, she snapped her fingers. Locust Tree, Glass Crystal, Angelina Sakura, Feather Spirit, Antalya, Sorrowful Charm, Hathaway, Rosette Rose, Tear Feather Spirit, Kite. What do you think? Isaac's pen hovered over the paper, trembling slightly, but only slightly. The long list of names went on for 5 minutes, without stopping, made Isaac's pen hover over the paper. After a long time, it fell again. He wrote 2 words. Sephora Kite, H? He asked again. His expression was calm and without any anxiety. He was as cold and arrogant as ever. 18? The girl continued to think, well, I should be 12 this month, right? I'll be 18 in a few months. It's not wrong to fill in 18 first. 18 is good, so I don't have to change it later. Isaac's expression did not change. He wrote, unknown. Then, without stopping, without asking any questions, he wrote female in the gender column. Immediately, the delicate and cute little girl raised her eyebrows and seemed to be angry. You dare to assume my gender? Sephora, Miss Kite. Isaac tried to maintain his calm. You already mentioned your gender in the file you submitted yesterday. I don't think there will be any omissions. Is that so? The girl blinked her eyes innocently and took the lead to look away, as if she was shy. Oh, I forgot. I hope that such a regret will not appear in your future career. Isaac picked up the stamp and stamped it at the end of the document. Pa, a bright red brand, was left behind. Welcome to the Ivory Tower, Miss Hua Yuan. He didn't know why, but when he said the last few words, there was a faint sense of weakness. Well, thanks a lot. The girl jumped down from the chair and reached out to take the folder. She asked excitedly, where should I go next? Are there any other procedures to be completed? I really like the uncles and aunties outside. They're nice to talk to. No, there isn't. Isaac decisively interrupted her. Please go home and wait for the notice. The Academic Affairs Office will arrange the follow-up for you. That's so troublesome. How about I come back tomorrow? No, I'm on a business trip tomorrow. He looked outside the room and raised his voice. Madame Zhenshi, please help me send Madame Hua Yuan out. It was rare for him to lose his original reserved demeanor and rigid rules. Only after he closed the door did he heave a sigh of relief. He felt tired in his heart. He turned back and silently stared at the backup document for a long time. He turned the wheel of the safe and then put the almost completely blackened document into the vault in the deepest part of the Ivory Tower. In this way, the Ivory Tower's Alchemy Equipment Management and even the Alchemy Research Center, Tai Academy, welcomed its new owner without any warning or rumor. At the same time, it quietly and secretly welcomed its new owner. She looked about 13 years old. She was at the most adorable age for children. Her skin was as white as the sun. Her dress was exquisite and cute, but she was loosely draped in a man's shirt. The sleeves were so long that it was almost impossible to see her pair of slender little hands. There was also an identity tag hanging around her neck that didn't match her appearance at all. She hummed happily as she walked forward. Her figure was slim and slender. Her long black hair was like a phantom, fluttering slightly in the breeze. The hair ornaments hanging on her hair also swayed, as if they were dispersing with her long hair. She flew into a dreamlike bubble. Jeanne, she followed her step by step, but she didn't know why, but she was distracted. It was hard to imagine that one day she would be distracted by looking at a little girl. Was she some kind of hidden perverted Lilicon? No. Now she was more like a stalker, because she should have just walked her to the door, but she unknowingly followed her for a long time. And the moment her footsteps stopped, the little girl seemed to hear the voice in her heart. She turned around and looked at her. The sun shone through the gaps in the shade, making the pair of black eyes overflowing with magnificent brilliance. You do look like a stalker. That's right, Zhenshi, she said. Jeanne, she stiffened in place and subconsciously took a step back. She hurriedly explained, No, 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 I was distracted. I'm sorry, that's not right. Why, that's right, I can hear what you're thinking. The girl's smile became more and more cheerful. I say, don't worry, your relationship with Miss Satoko is very strong. It won't change because of my existence. No, I'm with Satoko. Satoko is just my... Jinshi's face turned red in an instant. She was frightened. But with those eyes looking at her, she couldn't say that she only saw Satoko as a little sister. In the end, she suddenly sadly found that she was actually craving Satoko's body. She was lowly. Then, when she woke up from her trance, she found that the young and delicate face was already close to her, looking at her with interest. It was as if she could see the pain in her soul. It was full of joy and evil. Jeanne, she subconsciously screamed and fell back, but she found that she was sitting on a bench. Before she could breathe a sigh of relief, she saw the little girl jump up and sit next to her. Oh, this is so interesting. What are people thinking in their heads every day? It's so unhealthy. It makes a child like me blush. Coffee or milk? Huh. Jeanne, she was stunned. Then I'll give you milk. She took out a handful of candies from the small bag under the man's shirt and gave her one. Jeanne, she looked at the candy in her hand in confusion. She looked at the little girl next to her. She was obviously different from the past, but this side profile was so familiar that she forgot to breathe. She subconsciously blurted out, Miss Satoko? As soon as she said it, she realized that she forgot herself and awkwardly shook her head. I'm sorry. No, you're not wrong. A calm voice came, causing her to freeze in place. She was stunned. Or rather, you've only just noticed the similarities between me and Huai Zasuko. You're already a little too slow. The little girl took off the wrapper of the coffee candy, opened her mouth, and threw it into her mouth. She happily savored the burnt and sweet taste. In the long silence, Jeanne, she couldn't help but jump up from the chair and exclaim, Miss Satoko, don't worry, it's not a dream. In other words, your memories in the past are more like a dream. The little girl looked down and folded the candy wrapper. Soon, it formed a lifelike little bird. She blew on it, and it spread its wings and flapped. Unfortunately, such a structure didn't meet the standards of aerodynamics, so it couldn't take off. It could only spin in the palm of her hand. W.I. Jeanne's eyes widened. She moved closer and didn't care that she was being too rude. Why did you become so small? Shouldn't Satoko be the older sister? This is one of the flaws of turning illusion into reality. There's always an infant stage, which is why humans are so troublesome. The little girl who was chewing on the coffee candy calmly raised her hand and pressed it against Jeanne's forehead. Calm down. In a way, I'm indeed that Satoko of yours. However, I might be different from what you think. You should have noticed it, right? The part of Satoko that's not human. In the short silence, Jeanne, she nodded with difficulty. She had already prepared herself for the possibility that she was just chasing an illusion. After all, she had been in school for so long, and she had learned a lot, including the existence of divine incarnations, soul reflections, and even soul phenomena. However, to be honest, Satoko was different from all of these. She came from Tangi's experiment. Through her alchemy and gifts, through Huai Shi's afterimage, she condensed the incarnation of young Master Ming's compassionate divinity. Under Huai Shi's acting and maintaining, it gradually broke away from Huai Shi's shackles and finally formed a miracle mark. It was not an exaggeration to call it a phenomenon. Tangi gave it divinity, and Huai Shi gave it humanity. Finally, through the miraculous carrier of the afterimage, it formed a reflection. In the night of Dan Boburn, countless people witnessed it and finally completed the miracle on Earth. Now, the reflection had completed its mission and had completely disappeared. It was just that Tanguy and Huaisher never thought that they would leave behind such a delightful result. An interesting soul. After wandering in the darkness for so long, she did not get lost. She only saw a glimmer of light and chased it all the way until now, regardless of whether it was a flat road or an abyss should it be called simple or stupid. No matter what, this stubbornness was enough to be admired and moved. But in the end, she still had to be told the answer. Isaac was too much like her teacher. Although he looked unreasonable, he was always too hesitant and gentle in these matters. So she could only swallow the truth and silently suffer a stomachache. Because of this, it dragged on for longer and longer. But after knowing this result, what would she do? For a long time, she stared at her blankly. After a long time, she suddenly whispered, "So I may never see Miss Sakiko again." "Perhaps." The little girl nodded. "There are always parting in life. You encountered a dream and woke up, so you saw the sun. But no matter how beautiful the dream was in the past, you should not stay there." The girl was silent. In the end, she could not help but tear up. "Although I was prepared, but I still feel sad. I'm sorry." She awkwardly wiped the corner of her eyes, lowered her head, and suppressed her sobs. "Don't you feel resentful?" "Junshi?" The little girl looked back at her and asked curiously, "Maybe Sakiko's existence is just a lie." She shook her head hard. "I can persevere until now. I can become the person I am today. It is all because of Miss Sakiko's teachings. I am very grateful to her." She awkwardly wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes, raised her head, and seriously answered, I want to become a person like Miss Sakiko." She seriously said, "Even if she is a fake, it doesn't matter. I will never forget her." In the silence, the little girl who was scrutinizing her raised her eyebrows. Suddenly, she smiled. She happily reached out and rubbed her hair. "What a good child. She said, "Miss Sakiko's existence is a miracle itself. Now that you have received this miracle, you are walking on the path she expected. So don't be uneasy and afraid. You are the trace she left in this world. So do your best. One day, you will also become someone's Sakiko, become the light that illuminates them." She paused for a moment, then suddenly changed the topic, and her smile became mischievous. "But now, you should enjoy the youth that belongs to you, and Miss Sakiko." Under the afternoon sun, a gentle breeze blew from afar. Once again, it blew her long hair. She lightly jumped down from the bench, waved goodbye, and turned to leave. But when he finally turned his head, he looked at the two figures hiding behind the bushes in the distance with a meaningful gaze. She did not know whether it was curiosity or pleasure. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.